Welcome to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, also known as
Snake Bros.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science. We are operating now from our emergency backup podcasting day Thursday because we, due to work, missed a normal podcasting day of Tuesday. So this is the emergency backup podcasting day. Fail-safe override emergency backup podcasting day.
Just planted 3,000 vines.
That's right.
In the ground. Hey.
Was that me?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Thought I was pro. Oh, it's the Show Observer.
Farming.
Yeah.
Really takes it out of you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just planting. Like, you have to make the trellis, and that involves posts and concrete, and then you have to put in a bunch of poles and everything, and then you got to measure everything. You got to survey it all out. You know, you got to do the ruling. You got to rule.
Yeah.
And then the vines come in, and then you have to dig holes, and then you have to plant
3,000 holes.
And you have to run the irrigation before you do the holes. And yeah, so we did all the irrigation, and we put 3,000 holes, and then you got to put stakes in for each one, and then the stakes have to be tied into the fucking wires.
15,000 feet of irrigation.
You have to tie the stakes to the wires, but you have to run the wires, and there were two, so that was like what? Who knows how much wire?
30,000 feet of wire.
Yeah, and it's all in a day's work.
No, we didn't do all that in one day. But
Well, yeah. It was one day for God.
It's been a long process. Yeah.
What is it, 1,000 years? All right, folks. Show Observer says, I'm ready. If I need to wait for the next section, let me know.
We'll connect with him.
Yeah, we're gonna. And connected. Time warp. Time fucking warp.
Time warp.
So, okay, Kyle has been going...
Slow news week, folks.
Yeah.
I got nothing.
There was a boom story.
The FBI is looking into it, so
Right.
We're definitely not going to know.
Which means that all the boom stories are going to stop now.
Sky booms. Boom
Stories, that's right.
Basically, there were some booms, and now the FBI is looking into it, so we'll never hear anything about booms again.
That's right. There will never... Yeah. And the FBI will disavow all knowledge of booms.
But anyway, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, so Kyle's been going through Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision, which is the one, like, okay, that's actually his most infamous, book. That was the one that was the biggest bestseller. That was the first one that he published. And I have only read that one once, and it was a long time ago. The one I've gone over and over and over is Earth in Upheaval.
Yeah.
So I keep telling Kyle, like Earth in Upheaval is really great. But I've kind of heard, because he's listening to it using his reader, so I've kind of overheard some of it, and it's badass. Like, it really is badass. Like, all the connecting shit that you were talking about.
Yeah,
I just want stacks of these.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I need a notebook, but I can't because I'm busy. But he's like going through right now. Like, the whole first part of the book is pretty much him setting the table for this idea, and in setting the table, he's basically going through all these ancient texts and talking about how they sort of corroborate each other's stories, and they're from different parts of the world, but every one is concerning like some, miracle phenomenon that's happening in the sky or in the heavens or whatever, and the same sort of descriptive words are used throughout these different texts written by different people in different parts of the world around the same time. So there's a lot of stuff. Like right now, he's talking about all the stuff going on during the Exodus, where the Israelites, leave Egypt, and there's just like all this crazy shit. And he's at the same time he's talking about comets and the tales of comets and all that, and he's kind of describing it in that way, and like. The how they talked about the Nile turned to blood or whatever.
Yeah.
And in other parts of the world, there's the same thing. Like they're talking about how all the water turned to blood, and then some of the text, like the translation is just like a blood red.
Yeah.
And then They talked about how like it rained blood, and there was just like this red dust like all over the place.
You know that most recently happened in 2012 in India. It was kind of all over the news. It was right before the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
It was in November or something like that. And in like large parts of India, I can't remember exactly where in India, but I know it was from India. They had red rain, and it was like it turned all the water red. There were pictures of like rivers that were just like this dark orange or red color. And then they took samples, of course, right? And they were like looking at them. They're like, these are human blood cells.
No, that's weird.
Rained out of the sky. Like, and of course,
I think we talked about that.
Yeah, so
like in one of the sky, like when you were doing the list of stuff that came out of the sky.
Yeah, so
I think I remember
like,
that.
but think about this: like, even a small rainstorm, because they cover such large areas, this is an enormous amount of liquid, right? It doesn't seem like it may not seem like it if you get like a quarter of an inch or whatever wherever you are, but that's a quarter of an inch over multiple square miles.
Yeah,
it adds up, and like to have human red blood cells rain over large areas of land such that they could turn rivers red. This is very strange. This shows a Kerala red rain phenomenon was a blood rain event that occurred from 25th of July. Okay, so I was off. 25th of July to 25th of September. No, that's not the one I'm talking about. There was one in 2012, bro. But that is another one, yeah. 2001. Yellow, green, and black rain also reported. Color rain 1896. Most recently in June 2012. Okay, there it is. 15th of November, 15th of November 2012 to 27th of December 2012 in eastern and north central provinces of Sri Lanka, which is part of India. Yeah, cool. So yeah, and they tested. Okay, so the first guy the first test results that came out, and they were like, these are blood cells. Of course, there was like all over people were like, that's ridiculous, right? Like there was all this skirp all over the world, but it's like, and it's never actually been,
disproven. Or whatever.
Yeah, it's not been refuted because they are red blood cells. Like there was just this widespread, hand waving and dismissal of it.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things like the River Jordan. At some point in one of the biblical tales, like the army needs to cross the Jordan River, and it just like the river just dries up and they go across or whatever. It's like they take the Ark of the Covenant out there and it just like parts the water.
Yeah.
And they cross it. Well, he's like talking about there was actually a recent event. I think it was in the it had to have been whenever at some point shortly before he wrote the book, I guess.
Okay.
It's in modern times.
So like 50s, right?
Whenever it was, yeah. It's in modern times. A large portion of the bank of the Jordan collapsed, it fell into the river, and it just totally blocked the river, and the river dried up for miles down below for like hours and hours during the day.
Dammed up, and then it was like, then it broke through. And
it eventually broke through, so like I was just like, oh shit, that's cool.
Yeah, you don't even need a catastrophic event. Like,
so he's going through all these, the basic, the plagues that were happening, and I think you brought this up before, where one of the plagues was an earthquake.
Yeah,
and. Well, it was
it doesn't say an earthquake, but
it says that it killed all the firstborn sons of the
firstborn sons of Egypt,
of the Egyptians.
Yeah,
but none of the Israelites were harmed, and so like he talks about that it was probably an earthquake, and the Egyptian houses, they were the elite.
They made of stone,
and their houses were made of stone, and the Israelites lived in little brick huts
and grass huts, right?
Log cabins.
They didn't hurt you when they fell on you,
right? But also the brick is a lot softer and whatever. But they had log cabins and stuff, and then often he was saying that it was for younger people that had just gotten married. It was like customary to build a little log cabin in front of the parents' houses.
That's right. Yeah.
So anyway,
this is why the Japanese build with wood and paper, folks. Wood and paper does not hurt when it falls on you in earthquakes. The Japanese learned this a long time ago.
But also wood's flexible. I mean, stone.
Right, it can flex, yeah. But even so, like, because you see some of their temples and they have these enormous, like, they look like these giant wooden beams or whatever. Yeah. But still, it's like, that one single wooden beam might kill you, but most of it's just paper and balsa.
Yeah, and straw.
and bamboo. Yeah.
Let's put stone shingles on top. No! But it's really cool, dude. Like I like I said, I need a notebook because he'll go through one text after another, just about one particular event.
Yeah, referencing it, yeah.
And like in so many of these texts, even in the Americas, like some of the ancient, like Mexican texts and stuff, that like talk about the sun staying in the sky for so many days or whatever, or it's staying nighttime for so long or whatever.
Yeah.
And so there's one thing that I was thinking about, like they're now talking about, or he's talking about the fact that none of these cultures recorded Venus.
Right.
Up until a certain time. And it's like, that's weird because Venus is like one of the most prominent planets that we can see. It gets really bright pretty often.
Yeah. 9 months out of the year, it's like the morning or the evening star or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Now it does have a thing where it's like, it's kind of like the moon where it goes through these phases where half of it's lit and then sometimes you can't see it. Right now, it's in this order to where whenever it's closest to us, it's full.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily always have to have been that way.
Right.
That's going to change, right? So I guess periodically it will be when it's closest to us, we don't see it because it's
right. If it's closest to us and the sun is behind it,
right,
then we're not going to see it.
But it'll be still when it's on the other side of its orbit, you can still see it.
Yes,
it's
right.
It's pretty prominent. So it's strange that like these ancient cultures that were like highly developed in terms of astronomy, and they had recorded the movements of the other 4 planets, the close ones, but they don't have Venus in there at all. And then Venus shows up later.
Right.
They're just like, oh, it's a new arrival, and they celebrate it and everything.
Yeah, it's like it's bearded. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's the same with the god, like the gods. The Pallas Athena shows up, right? She's born of.
Yeah, I think you were talking about this last time.
So
like one of them comes out of.
Yeah, Metis gets eaten by Zeus, and then she comes out of his forehead, and yeah.
Yeah, so he's talking about that, and like the basically the dust of the comet. The idea is that like we pass through, like when Venus showed up, it's the tail is like all massive and crazy, and we end up going through the tail.
Yeah.
And so there's all these stories, like the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed, or whatever, and it was raining down like, sulfur and all this kind of stuff. It's like we're happening to go through that part of the tail or whatever, and it's
and there's something about the pillar of salt too. I can't remember what it was, but there was something weird about the translation. Like I can't remember who it was, but the guy was like, so you could see salt, but that word could also be this other word that I can't remember what it meant. But he was like, so it might be this, but the idea
salt of the earth, salt of Venus.
Yeah, it's like how do you turn a person into a pillar of salt? But there are weird pillars of salt in that area.
You dry them out,
right? In that area, they're like near the Dead Sea or whatever. There are these weird, like just pillars of salt. They're salts. They're not like sodium chloride or whatever. But yeah.
So he talks about also the shadow of death. And there's all these different places
shadows
that they talk about like how the earth turned black, and in the like the pharaohs, the plagues going on in Egypt, there was the time when they just couldn't see anybody right in front of them.
They all had like a lay down just
right,
black,
and they talk about the timeline. They're like, it was like this for so many days or whatever. Well, there's this other culture like way off somewhere in a totally different area of the world, and they're like, it was also dark, right?
Yeah.
Of course, they don't know that it's dark in Egypt,
right? They're like, it was fucking dark for 3 days. Yeah.
So they're saying it's like dark for 9 days, and then one's saying it was dark for 3 days or whatever, and so it's like kind of been averaged out to like 7 days. Or something.
Or it has something to do with where you are. Right.
It could be, but the other point that he made was like, how do you know if it's that pitch
if you don't
black,
have a watch,
if it's pitch black and you can't even see your hand in front of your face, how do you know how much time has passed?
Right.
Especially when like, how are you going to sleep when there's that much dust?
Right.
And it's like, so there's not really a way that they could have accurately clocked it until it was over, and then they saw how many days might have passed based on the position of the sun or whatever. But at the same time, there's like all this shit where it's like when everything cleared up, they didn't know where the sun was going to rise.
Right. That's right. There's the weird stuff about how how do they put it? Like somebody watched the sun rise in the east and in the west, and it was 5 times.
There was like we were flipping over, and there's like all these ancient like ideas of the. And again, you had brought this up the 52-year
the Jubilee.
The Jubilee. Like, so the idea was that before Venus was brought in and settled in its orbit, that it was a comet, and it came in
Yeah.
and passed very close, and there was all this upheaval, right?
Yeah.
There was all this crazy, chaotic shit. 53 years later, it comes back.
Yeah.
Or whatever, 52 or
Yeah,
53.
52, yeah. Jubilee.
It comes back, and so then they start predicting, like, oh God, like everybody's getting ready for the
Right.
next 52-year period, and it doesn't happen again. Like the destruction doesn't happen again, but they still see the comet in the sky.
Right. It doesn't get as close.
It doesn't get as close.
So, but it's like...
Yeah, and so they're like, ah, the whole comet thing. It's like they free all the slaves and they settle
Yeah.
all the debts and everything,
Right.
and then the comet goes away, and
all
they're like,
debts are forgiven,
"Oh."
like all rented properties
And so-
returned.
Yeah, so they start. So it's like it develops this culture where they're like, okay, if we do all this stuff, then it like holds off the destruction. Right?
Yes, that's right.
So they start thinking that they are responsible.
Yeah.
and their actions. This gives rise to this idea of like the sacrifices,
The sacrifice to the gods,
you
yeah.
know. But of course, this would be after so many people had been wiped out on the planet. Right, so you have these cultures that built these pyramids down in Mexico or whatever.
Yeah.
and they're almost completely, utterly destroyed.
Yeah.
But if it's true that like they sort of have the same situation going on there, where kind of like the Jubilees,
Yes.
that they start believing that they can forestall the
death
destruction.
that death is what the gods want, and if they can
Right.
give the gods enough death, they won't destroy everything.
So they start freaking. So it's almost like you can look back and say, when did this custom begin,
Right,
of
the
the
blood
sacrifices, and then you can sort of date when that comet came in
Yeah.
and destroyed shit. So anyway, going back.
That's
to,
why
to my.
yeah,
I have this other thing that's
cannibal gods.
yeah. Well, I've been looking into the Sumerians, right?
Yeah.
The Sumerian ancient shit. And in one of the cylinder seals, like this was one of the most convincing things to me about Sitchin's whole
Okay.
deal. In one of the cylinder seals, there's a diagram in the corner of it. I guess it's a cylinder, but
Yeah.
when you roll it out in one corner, there's this diagram.
There's a corner. I
It's just-
promise.
There's not a corner.
You just when you stop rolling, it makes a corner.
Yeah.
And the diagram's there.
Friggin'
if you
whatever.
If you roll it the right way.
It's on the top, I guess.
You're talking about the one with the planets and the sun?
Yes, it's got the sun in the center, and there's like all these little dots around,
and
and
the right number. Yeah.
yeah, but that would include Venus.
Yes.
So how is that? So that made me question, like, okay, Sumer is the oldest culture that we know of,
Well,
right? And
I'd say the dating is wrong.
that's
on
what I'm
it.
saying.
Yeah.
So like
This stuff is is older. That like Sumer, the at least the stuff we're looking at now, because Sumer is obviously it spans the cataclysm, right? Because they show up out of nowhere and like establish cities that and they seem to know what they're doing already, right? And they have this sort of they have this sort of thing that like they kind of they talk about Eridu and you know. And you can tell by the way they're talking about them that they're not talking about the ones that they're founding, because they give these histories for, especially for, and Sitchin goes through this for Eridu and especially they give these histories and they're like, so was inundated and blah blah blah, you know. And then when you look at itself, the one we know, right, the one in the Middle East, it doesn't have these flood patterns that they talk about, but there are flood patterns in there. But like Eridu was never flooded, and they're like, oh, it was inundated, but so. The
Okay,
idea
so
is
they're rebuilding the
That's right.
cities
They're
that
like
they-
it's like New York, right?
I
New
gotcha.
Eridu, New the
Okay.
original ones were completely destroyed. So Sumer was much older
as a
civilization, and
gotcha.
they didn't get completely wiped out because they had good astronomy and
well, they
some
came
people,
down out of the mountains.
right. That's right.
Because they
Some
had
people-
gone somewhere to survive.
That's right. That's right. And they came down with all this mud, and they're like, "Let us make bricks out of this mud."
Yeah. Okay, so apparently, well, anyway, that's a great point. But that was one of the first things I'm thinking of. Like, okay, if Venus is new, relatively new, and it's like all these. It's not just Venus, folks. Like what he's describing in this thing is that they're like, I mean, it's really compelling.
It's the Saturn theory, right?
Well, no, it's this whole flipping over. Like,
Yeah.
we were just talking about this the other day, and I was like, yeah, if you start rotating a cylinder full of water on
was
its
really
polar
cool.
axis, the water begins to spin.
I've been trying this.
So it's like if you spin a ball in space, will it eventually turn over on its axis, right?
Yes.
Well, if something comes in and disturbs the balance of things, it seems to me highly probable that it could flip over. I'm not talking about a polar shift in terms of Earth crustal displacement or necessarily like a magnetic polar reversal, but the actual rolling of the ball.
Right. Yes.
Right. As it's spinning, the whole, all the way down to the center, everything is
right.
actually flipping over, because these texts are describing like they had everything figured out.
Yeah.
They had everything mapped. And then this new thing comes in and all this shit starts happening. And then after the main calamity is over, they are not sure. They're starting to look back at the sky and say, okay, where is everything?
Right. And why is it all wobbly?
Where's the sun going to rise? And there's like some recordings of like people basically betting on it. They're like, it's going to come up over there. It's going to come up over there. And then, like when it rose in the east, everybody was like, whoa.
Yeah. What?
Because it was the opposite.
Right. It used to rise in the west. Yeah.
And so that made me think about Japan, you know, the land of the rising sun. And,
yeah.
You know, it's like, so maybe it used to rise the other way.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah. If it rose in the west. And it says that like it flip flopped like 5 times in this long cataclysmic period or whatever.
Yeah.
It says that, is it Ra or Thoth, Tahoti, that like during his time he's witnessed the sun rise in the east and then the west and the east and the west. Yeah.
And so they talk about this is one of the things that, you know, we're in the 5th sun right now or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, imagining that is really what happened. And so after this whole thing is over with and it's like all settled down now and the comet is kind of out of the way. We're not going to be hitting it anymore. It's settled into its orbit. Got this new planet in the sky.
Then Mars shows up.
What better thing to do than for basically all of the leftover remnants of of this global civilization, whatever it was, and all their disparate parts now, than to start building hinges, bro.
Right, because they got to figure out.
They have to map it all out.
Yeah, they have to rebuild the calendar. Exactly. Right.
So that it's like
that's when they start adding days, right?
And this is where, like, to me, I see Graham Hancock's idea that this is all this ancient stuff that we're looking at is actually a legacy.
Yeah.
Because it's so weird that we all seem to like start building the same kind of stuff around the same times. Right. But it would make sense if we were a global civilization that, you know, people that were connected all over the globe, and then this crazy shit happens and it wipes everything out and disconnects all the societies from each other.
Yeah.
And then they have to survive, and some of them, you know, probably saved the knowledge better than others, and so it took some areas longer. They may have been hit worse.
Yeah, like those poor gas station attendants on Easter Island. Stuck there for thousands of years.
But still, it's like even here, like we have the Serpentine Mound in Ohio. Right. It's like that was an effort to record the you know, periodicity or whatever of the moon and the lunar cycles.
Yeah.
And then, you know what I'm saying? It's like
it's a lunar eclipse predictor.
Right, but it's right on the edge of an impact site.
It's pointing at an ancient crater. That's right.
And it's a
snake carrying an egg in its mouth.
Right. It's like perfect. You know, so I'm thinking, I wonder if that thing actually dates to, like, say the same time as Stonehenge was being built.
Yeah.
Or any of these other sort of astronomically.
You know, they date
aligned.
it to the intrusive burials, so that's.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I think that you're right, that those kind of things, like all of these, I mean, even the dolmens and the stuff that Jim Vieira was looking at, the colonial root cellars, right, that were aligned to the frickin' solstices.
Yeah.
Those are all part of this same, you know, you could see the sort of, like maybe not technological level, like, cause everybody was like knocked down to almost nothing where they're working with rock.
Yeah, but the stuff he points out in the construction style, he's like, this is far above like a settler, right? Just like average settler.
Yeah, they're
ability.
they're doing the freaking corbelled ceilings and shit like that, and the giant lintels going across.
Right, they had to build a false structure inside, and the entire ceiling is dry laid stone in a dome.
Yeah. That's right.
Dry laid stone in a dome.
It's like, come on. Colonists don't do this.
That's right.
This is not a root cellar. And some of them are like way up in the mountains where no one ever had a house. You know, like way the hell up there. He's like, this is my Indiana Jones moment. when he goes there on the solstice. But yeah, so this kind of, I always think about this too, how when you look at all these ancient astronomical records, and when modern astronomers are doing it and they start going back in time with them, they reach a point to where all the eclipse records suddenly stop matching what we could calculate.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So like all these ancient astronomers who were otherwise like extremely precise in their measurements, even though they weren't using, supposedly they weren't using lenses or brass tubes or whatever. They just had, eyes and whatever markers they would put out there. Nevertheless, their records of the various movements of the bodies in space were very, just like really good. But for some reason, all their eclipses they just suddenly all over the world, all the eclipses stop being correct. All the ones that are recorded everywhere.
That right there has got to be like, what date is that? How
it's
long ago?
Yeah, it's like 3000 something BC, something or other. It's like right in there somewhere. It just stops working.
Yeah.
And like the same thing is with Venus, but Venus comes all the way up. I mean, Copernicus, like the guy who is basically the foundation of modern astronomy. Copernicus, who came up with the heliocentric, like we go around the sun theory. Mm-hmm. His measurements of Venus are off. He shows it it's got a periodicity of like 274 days, whereas ours, what we see now, is like 278 or something like that, and Venus is incredibly regular. It's got the most regular orbit of any planet in the system now, and so they're like, well, how is he off like 8 days? How can you be Copernicus and not know that that's Venus right there, not down below the horizon yet, right?
Yeah. What? Okay, so
that's in 1500.
So
AD.
If Venus was a comet,
like
whatever, all the stuff that was being boiled and burnt off of it is gone now.
Right. Well,
what is it like? Like, what's the planet like?
Oh my God. Yeah. So Velikovsky predicted, because of what he thought it was. He was like, look, Venus will be incredible. It'll be anomalously hot, right? And it will have an anomalously young surface. There will be relatively very low, because like the way astronomers age a surface of a body in space is by looking at impact craters, right? Because you can kind of get this, especially in the solar system, you can kind of get this regular idea of like, obviously the more impact craters it's got, the older the thing is. When they start layering over top of each other, you're like, okay, so they could kind of guesstimate.
The moonship is old, folks.
That's right. The moonship is actually older than the solar system. Like the most recent estimations of the moon are like, wow, this thing is older than the sun. Has a lot of craters. So some people started.
But if Venus was a comet and rolled right nearby us, then the moon would just
right. Yeah. Again, you have to think that these are uniformitarians. They don't like anything cataclysmic, even if it's out in space, right? Mm-hmm. So like the moon couldn't have had a cataclysmic bombardment period that didn't also happen to every other planet. But so it's one of the things that people started to say, like, well, maybe some of those craters are not craters, but they're lava bubbles, right? They pop and it's like, come on, guy. Yes, we know that the moon is covered in giant seas of lava, but then you have to explain how those got there, because the moon is not volcanic.
But anyway, Venus.
Yeah. So Venus still has a tail, but you can only see it in the infrared. It has a cometary like if you look in the infrared, it's got this long thing coming off of it that's faintly visible in the infrared.
So how did the ancients have infrared?
Maybe.
They could have. They could have.
Yeah.
Most advanced butt flap.
Hey, man, the giants probably could see in the infrared.
But seriously, like they record it having a beard. Like this is like so many, like that's what he's pointing out. It's like all these ancient texts. This is why I wish I had a notebook so that I could actually give you
all the text,
the actual text. Like I will continue to go through this and take notes.
Yeah, the bearded star.
When I can. So just be patient. Right now, I'm just like giving you my astonishment.
Right. So when Velikovsky gave those predictions of Venus being anomalously hot, of its surface being very young, I mean, he was, and he actually gave this, like, he was challenged. So, like, he was invited to give a speech in front of some Ivy League bullshit or whatever. And they were like, yeah, give us your predictions, dumbass. Right? Like, let us prove you wrong. So he's like, well, Venus will be this and this. And everybody was like, pfft. They thought that Venus, because it's like slightly closer to the sun than the Earth, that it would be a little bit warmer, but not much. And it would have a surface that was the same. It would look basically the same as Earth's. Like, they didn't know if it had water or whatever, but they were saying, like, okay, its age is relatively the same as Earth's. Right, its mass is very close to the Earth. It's going to have a regular atmosphere. They didn't think it would be much different than Earth. Well, when they finally got some orbiters around it, we tried to land one there, and it just imploded and melted or whatever. The Soviets managed to land one and have it last. It lasted for a couple of minutes, and then just it imploded and melted. But it measured temperatures of like 800 Celsius on the surface. 8 or 9, like close to like quartz melting temperature, right? Incredibly hot. And then the pictures it took of the surface area, once you get down beneath all the, the Venus clouds, because the Venus clouds are just the green yellowish, and they just, you can't see anything. But once it got below all that and you could see the surface, it looked like mine tailings, just mounds and mounds of rock and rubble and sand and dust and dirt.
What color?
Well, I mean, it was green and yellow. I mean, it's not really clear because all the pictures were black and white, but they're imagining. But the point is that there are no impact craters. It is geologically a young surface. There aren't any mountains. There aren't any deep basins. There are no giant canyons. It's just mounds and mounds of like sand and dirt and rock and rubble and dust, right? Like it just got made basically, and it's still cooling down. That's why it's so fucking hot. Of course, now they're like, well...
Oh, shit.
Yeah, that's right. The Sphinx is a bearded lady.
Yeah, Brett's pointing this out.
Aphrodite, male Aphrodite, a bearded Aphrodite statue on Cyprus, the beard of the Sphinx. The beard of Hatshepsut. Yeah, okay, so...
Hatshepsut.
Yeah, Hatshepsut. That's, okay, so that woman is supposedly okay, so in the Exodus story, going back to that, there's this like the Moses' mother lays him as a baby into the river and gives him up to the river and to God, right? And he goes floating down. And then the Egyptian princess is like, oh, baby, right? And she takes him and raises him. That's Hatshepsut. That's who that is. Like that princess. And she ends up ruling Egypt as one of the only female pharaohs in the history of Egypt. And Moses was like her fucking adopted son.
Yeah.
Right? So when he goes back to face Pharaoh, the Pharaoh there at the time, that guy is like the brother of her. Mm-hmm. So they know each other. They grew up together.
Yeah.
So there's this weird... This is one of the reasons why Moses isn't just like summarily executed when he goes there to do this. Because like the guy's like, oh shit, what's up, bro? He's like, let my people go. He's like,
sorry,
I need bricks, bro.
I need pyramids. We need to build more pyramids.
I mean, you guys are slaves. I'm sorry. I mean, you're not, but yeah, gotta have pyramids.
It's like, yeah, but they never even built your pyramid.
That's right. You can't build a good pyramid with slaves, right?
That's right. He told him.
Yeah, it's not gonna work out, dude. And then he builds one, and you can see they're falling apart. But anyway, so yeah, that's interesting that that's supposedly images of her, the bearded lady. Because she's obviously around during this whole time. But yeah, beards on women or female gods suddenly show up. Yep. So, yeah, the Venus stuff.
Bearded Venus.
I think the Venus stuff is convincing. Like, there's like everything that Velikovsky predicted about it is correct. So I went through this with the Laird Scranton book, right? Like he's looking at all the most modern data and saying, yes, like everything he predicted is either true or has not been disproven in any way. So,
dude, it's badass. Like, if anybody gets a chance, check it out.
In Collision.
Worlds in Collision.
Emmanuel.
I'm just getting started here.
Velikovsky.
We're going to take a snake break.
That's right.
So we'll be back in 30.
That's right. Venus. Snakes.
We're back. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, episode 49. Almost 50, bro.
Almost 50.
Almost 50.
Have a swift 50 number of podcasts to listen to. Swift 50.
So back to this Velikovsky stuff. I briefly want to talk about the physics real quick. I was thinking about it today. Again, this idea of the rotating, like I was telling you about shaking up the paint can or whatever a while back.
Yeah. Like
flipping the pole on a cylinder of water and the water spinning in there. And I remembered that there was this thing called a pro gyro exerciser ball.
That's right.
Or whatever. And it's like a ball, but then there's a wheel, a weighted wheel inside it, and you on two sides of the ball. There's the wheel's exposed, so you can like spin the wheel with you're holding the ring around the say the equator of the sphere, and the wheel's sticking out on the top and bottom, and you can spin it with your other hand, get it spinning. Then you start to rotate the pole of the ball, and that wheel just starts hauling ass, and it just it gets really fast, and then the faster it goes, the harder it is to rotate the poles because of the
angular momentum. But
right?
But you keep doing it, that makes it spin faster.
Right, and it's an exercise. You're just like, oh, you're like trying to push it faster, and that thing
will be amazing.
Is freaking hauling ass. So I was thinking that's
a reverse of what we're talking about.
Right. So our planet is spinning around.
Yeah,
and something could, in other words, take that angular momentum of the rotation and transduce that. I don't know if it's actually transduction, but use that energy basically to flip the pole. Like it would cause the same thing.
Like there's some kind of weird physics axiom here that basically says that like if you have some rotating body or whatever, it can flip 180 degrees on its the entire the angular momentum, the vector of force will like now point down as opposed to up or whatever, and that happens because of physics that. There's some kind of natural thing there.
Right, so thinking about...
Because the argument against the flip is that it would take so much energy to flip the planet over to take that vector of force and force it to point a different direction, right?
Okay, so I'm thinking about this ball. Like if I get the wheel spinning inside it, and then I rotate the ball on its polar axis, the wheel increases in speed.
Yeah.
So if you floated the ball in space with the wheel spinning, and you put some type of force on it that slowed the spinning of the wheel. Could that result in the flipping of the axis,
or increase the spinning of the wheel? Yeah, either way, like adding energy to the spin maybe would make it.
Well, I was thinking that when you rotate, because the polarity flip it's got this resistance, and when you do it, it adds energy to the spin.
Yeah.
So if you were to take energy from the spin, perhaps you could get the flip to happen.
Yeah.
As opposed
shouldn't it go both ways though?
If you applied the energy to flip the pole, not using the energy of the rotation to flip it, then it would speed up the rotation, is what I'm thinking.
Right. Okay. So I thought that that would, if you could reverse the process, then speeding up the rotation might cause the thing to flip too, because that's just kind of it's approaching it from the other direction. I don't know if that would work. Yeah, I don't know if that would work. But
I was thinking of
slowing it down may cause it to
flip, and so this is why they had to reclock everything. Like after
had to add 5 days to the fucking calendar. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it could have used
spinning slower.
It could have used the orbital energy.
Yeah.
And the rotational energy, and it just now our orbit doesn't line up with our day.
That's right.
It's not an exact number anymore.
Right.
Like it used to be 360.
Right. So the idea, this is always fascinating to me. What we have 360 degrees in a circle because that was how many days there used to be in the perfect Terran year.
Yeah.
Right. And you look at these ancient cultures, and they had what they called the sacred calendar, which had 360 days precisely in the Terran year, and every lunar month was 30 days or something like that. Right. And so. Here we go. Basic equation for rotational energy of a sphere, Ke rot equals 1/2 times 2/5 mr squared times v over r squared.
Right.
It's very simple.
Yeah. I don't
Ke rot equals 1/5 mv2.
I can't read that language.
That's mass times velocity squared. 1/5 of that equals the kinetic energy of something. Rotation. Yeah. Ke rot. LOL.
Anyway, so yeah, I want to go back to the
rapper name.
What you were talking about during the break with the, I don't remember what it was. You were starting to talk about Jupiter and some other shit.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea of what caused this comet that became Venus, and it is so the Greeks tell this story of Metis, a goddess who was pregnant. Right. She was pregnant with and she was one of the original pantheon. Okay, Metis is pregnant. She's like I guess you'd say her. She's like what's the Egyptian goddess's name? The one that's the sky, Nut or whatever.
Yeah,
right. Like she's like this very she's very ancient goddess. She's pregnant, but Zeus consumes her. Okay, so if you're looking at this astronomically, The idea is that Metis, this water world, this pregnant planet, pregnant with life, actually directly impacts into Jupiter. Now, the electric universe guys say this can't happen, right? But who knows? Like the physics say that if the universe isn't electric, the physics say that the planet would have basically flattened out like a pancake because Jupiter's atmosphere, theoretically, being a gas giant, it just gets more and more dense as it goes down. Eventually, the gas is now liquid, and then eventually that liquid becomes crystalline. Okay, so you kind of have this. You never actually hit anything solid, but it is solid down there somewhere. It's just a very slow gradation. So like the planet starts to impact this gas, and it's building up in front of it. Okay, it's just an enormous shockwave, and that flattens the planet out, and it actually runs into what would be Jupiter's core. Okay, and throws that out the other side of Jupiter. And that is what becomes Venus. Venus is
it
like
came out of the eye.
Yes, like or it may have caused the eye because
that's what I mean.
The eye actually has tongues that go all the way down to down into the core, and they could tell because of the materials it's bringing up.
Yeah,
right, and the electrical energy. So like it's got. If you think of the eye as a giant tornado, it's like the bottom tip of the tornado is like way down there, like on the core. Right, burning around on that diamond or whatever it is. But,
that's a freaking badass, man.
Yeah. So this planet comes in from the other side and like just bam, like think of billiards, like pool, like the one ball comes in, knocks the other one out, right? So Venus comes out of the other side of Jupiter and like generates this vortex that becomes the eye. Okay, and that may also be why there's this weird stuff with mana, because Jupiter is full of Chan, right? The carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen.
Yeah.
Everything you need for life and food, right? It's food. And so Venus generates this vortex that takes all these weird hydrocarbons and all this other shit and like spits it out from the core. So it's following the planet. Yeah. And of course, the planet itself is incredibly hot. It's basically a glowing, sparking, like shooting off electricity. It's like it's terrifying molten ball. Okay. And then it starts to go around wreaking havoc all over the solar system because anything it gets close to, it's either like, if you go with the electric universe, they're exchanging enormous bolts of electricity because it has Jupiter's energy level.
Yeah.
And this is weird. Like when they actually, this is another one of Velikovsky's predictions. He said that Jupiter's core will be far lower than all the other gas giants. Okay. So when they looked at
lower what? Lower density?
Lower mass.
Lower mass.
Yeah. So when they looked at Saturn's core is like 30 something Earth masses, right? And they're like, yeah, that seems about right for the whole thing. When they looked at Jupiter's, it's like 5, 7, right? It's really, and you're like, wait, this is the biggest planet in the solar system, and it's like 5 Earth masses at the core. Saturn's got 30. Clearly, Jupiter's lost most of its core.
That's crazy.
It could not have built, it. If you get rid of the sun, Jupiter is 99.99% of all the mass in the solar system. Like, it's enormous, right? Even with all the other gas giants, Jupiter's like 99% of all the mass. Okay, all the other planets are 1%, right? Like Jupiter has everything. Jupiter is the 99%, right? It has all, and it's they consider it to be basically a time capsule of the primordial material of which the solar system was formed, right? So how can it have the smallest, in terms of mass, core of all the gas giants? Like, why does it have a 5 or 7 Earth mass? Well, if it lost its core, and that's Venus, that's probably why. Which means that Venus might be very interesting if we could ever land on it. It's probably mostly diamond.
Damn.
Because if you think about it, you got all that carbon way down there in the core of Jupiter, where it's like incredibly hot, dense. And how do you make diamonds? You take carbon and make it really hot and crush it.
Yeah.
And you get it diamond. So it's like Venus could be diamond covered in dirt. That's why it's so fucking bright in the sky. It's just, and that's why it's associated with, all the shit about, I'm kind of half joking here. Like all the stuff about diamonds and love and eternal, and then there's Venus and love and like there's something going on here, right? These ancient ideas.
Yeah, that's weird. That's just, the whole situation is freaking mind-blowing to me. Like just the way that this guy is going through all these ancient texts from all over the world, like in every different scenario of like a type of cataclysm that seemed to have happened. And then all the different texts where they talk about the same thing. And he's like building towards this thing. Like I said, he's setting the table. he's building it all towards this idea of Venus being a comet and like all of these things, the shadow of death being the dust, like different parts of the cometary tail are hitting the planet, and
or so we're running through it. Yeah,
we're going through it,
and the tail can be hundreds of thousands of miles wide.
Right. So there's areas of the tail that are full of large rocks.
Yes.
So we run through that, and a couple of cities get destroyed by raining sulfur.
That's right.
We run through like this real dusty part of it, and no one can see anything for a couple of days.
Right. Or they say that because there are other cultures that say that the sun was like a pale, ghostly imitation of itself.
Right.
You're seeing through this incredibly deep, dense haze.
But there was a period in Egypt where they just couldn't even see their hand. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
just so freaking pitch black.
And then there's the manna, right?
And during that time, there's an earthquake.
Yeah.
Like while it's pitch black, there's an earthquake.
Right.
Great.
Yeah, that's right. Run. What?
So this is the thing that's really another line of thinking that I'm going on is like, okay, story of Moses, like, was he actually in contact with a Nepha who actually knew the science,
right,
and was able to predict these things that were going to happen? Or is it a story that has been, because Moses was the type of guy who's like, I'm going to go write a story about myself?
Or is it that Moses, steeped in the Egyptian mystery schools, was able to see this in the sky
and then later wrote about it?
Right. And he was like, but the Yeshua,
right?
God,
okay, so
Nepha told me this.
This is what I'm saying. So it's like he wrote the story basically about what happened after the fact. So he could have easily altered the story to say, so I knew that this thing was coming and I went and told the Pharaoh, like, hey, bro, like this is about to happen.
Right.
Or it was just coincidence that he happened to be there trying to make a deal.
Let my people go. He's like, no.
Look, I know how to make deals. Okay. I want you to free these people. They're great people. So he gets, and like, it just so happens.
I love the Pharaoh. I love the Egyptians.
I love everybody. You're just great people. But we got to have these people. We got to have them. Got to. So like, it just so happens that they say no, and then all this bad shit starts happening.
And he's like, I told you, man. I told you, bro, that you should have let him go,
Or was he really like going back and there's somebody telling him, or is it himself, like he actually knows what's going on and he's able to predict this? It just seems to me, it's like,
remember that
the idea that he could predict the various plagues doesn't.
Well, okay, so remember that
seem plausible.
Yeah, but this goes back. I'm thinking back to, I think we were talking about the Grail stuff, right? And in the Grail mythos, there's this part where it says that there was this heathen who could read the future in the stars, right?
Yeah.
And that he saw all these signs and portents, and like he knew the names of all the angels, and and he knew all this shit, and he saw the future destruction and calamities or whatever. And I'm thinking like that kind of thing. All of the mystery schools point to Egypt as the source for that knowledge, right?
Right.
So Moses, having been adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, is like raised up in the top mystery schools of Egypt. Now, what doesn't make sense is like, why didn't the Pharaoh?
Why didn't they know? This is what I'm saying.
But Moses may have been a prodigy. Like,
yes. I agree. But
there's the whole snake battle, right?
He also left, and so he didn't have the tools. Like they had all these badass tools and stuff, observatories, whatever. There, it's like he leaves, and he's out. So I'm just like, again, I'm gonna go ahead. And
I have like a. This is probably not what happened, but think about this. Like, these guys are in the main cities. They're at Heliopolis, right? And they're fucking dealing with drama. There's all the fucking elitist drama bullshit. Moses is out there in the desert with goats, looking at the sky.
Okay, yeah.
So that's kind
maybe
of
he erected a hinge.
Could be. I mean, there's the weird burning bush thing. He went out there, he smoked some weed. Burning bush.
So this is what I'm saying. Like at the same time, though, like after all this stuff goes down, he's still dealing with this guy who's saying, "Don't worship anybody but me." Yeah. Like, this is what I want to happen, and all this kind of stuff.
There's the strange monotheistic thing happening.
Right. Yeah. And so instead of like, it doesn't seem like he is the type of guy who's like, I want everyone to worship me.
Right. No, he definitely is not.
Because he's never like telling everybody like, do what I say. Like, he gets mad and like, flips out.
God damn it! You want the good news or the bad news?
No, we're not in Taurus anymore.
Yeah, this is not Taurus.
But that was another thing.
I talked him down to 10 from 15.
His brother Aaron is down there with the people while he's up on the mountain.
Yeah, makes the
And he's like, okay, we're not in Taurus anymore.
right.
So this is after all of this destruction. This lines up with the rest of the what Velikovsky is laying out. Like they had to figure out what age what are the positions of the zodiac. You know, where are we?
Yeah.
In the whole situation here, it's all been repositioned. So he goes up on a mountain.
Spoiler alert: it was Aries. Right, Aries is where they were. They went from Taurus to Aries, right?
Yeah. The ram.
Yeah. Right. The war god. It's Aries is Mars too. So like you have this thing with Venus goes by, and then Mars starts going
right. And just think of it like later on, you know, you have Isaac, and it's like at that point, it's like, oh yeah, sacrifice a ram, all this
ram's blood over the
Yes. So before that, it was like slay that cow, worship it.
That's right. The Apis bull was
Anyway, my point is that they had to go figure out like, are we still in the same situation? Like,
right.
And so it's like sort of couched in this story about worshiping a golden calf and all this kind of stuff. Whereas if you're looking at it like astronomers, it's like, no, okay, we're like, I've been up on this mountain. I built a hinge.
Yeah.
I'm checking it out. We're actually in this age.
Yeah, you guys are worshiping the wrong fucking thing. Well, see, this is the other thing. Like, two other things coincide with this period. That is, number one, the other weird monotheism that crops up, which is Akhenaten. Right? Akhenaten suddenly is like, okay, and he comes to the throne suddenly. So I'm thinking that Akhenaten probably is the successor to the guy who was dealing with Moses, who gets killed trying to chase them down, right? So then suddenly Akhenaten's, and he's like, okay, we can't, like the Pharaoh just got murdered by the gods, right? This is incredibly disruptive to Egypt and their whole concept of who the Pharaoh is and how he's enlightened, and you know what I'm saying? So him going out there to chase these slaves down and just totally getting destroyed by a godlike action, the water coming back and just wiping them out. Egypt is like, fuck, right? So Akhenaten shows up, and it's if Venus is in the sky, this explains all the weird imagery that Akhenaten has all over his stuff. It's they think he's a sun cult, but it's the fucking comet. All those rays are the fucking tail, right? And he's like doing this. What?
And what's on top of the sun? Disc.
Yeah,
there's a snake.
That's right.
There's a freaking serpent up there.
That's right. That's right. But like I've looked at those Akhenaten images, and I'm like, okay, that isn't the sun. That's Venus. That's the comet. Those rays, because you see these imagery, and like it's like Akhenaten sitting down, and Nefertiti, his wife, sitting down, and she's a longhead, right? And they've got these longhead kids, and they're holding them up, and it looks like they're taking sustenance from the beams of light.
Yeah.
And people are like, so they were a sun cult. I'm like, no, they were getting manna. They were consuming the manna from
space ramen.
Right.
Yeah.
They were eating space ramen. And this is like, so if Venus really is a core of Jupiter coming out, and it's dragging all this weird chon with it, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, food stuff, biological shit. Like as Earth runs through the tail, this stuff is dropping. And like the description of manna, like falling down like dew flakes, like these weird waxy flakes that would fall down.
Well, it's like they're cooking on their way down.
They've been cooked. They're getting iced and cooled, right? They come down. It's like got a like nice icing cover or whatever. But and they would melt. They would go bad or whatever. There was this weird rules about you can't keep any. Like only take what you can eat and don't try to preserve any of it. Maybe because it would go bad really quickly. Like
just like ramen, yeah.
Right. Once you cook it, eat it or throw it away. Do not keep that shit. Yeah. Like we have a friend he had a bag, like a Ziploc bag with ramen in his car that was like 3 days. He's like, bro, I don't think this is not even good. I opened it. I was like, oh my God, have you been eating that? Well, I ate some yesterday. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, dude, why aren't you dead? Yeah. You know who you are, bro. You know who you are. Anyway, like, so that could be what Akhenaten is doing. They're not worshiping the sun. This is the comet. And this is why he starts a new religion. Pharaoh gets wiped out, and he's like, we're doing something wrong here.
Yeah.
And Akhenaten's big claim to fame is that he stepped away from all of the ancient, this massive pantheonic, like, ancient Egyptian religion setup with all these priests and all these temples and all this stuff. And he started a new thing, and he went out into the desert, and he built Amarna, the city of Akhenaten, right? And even his name, the Aten, they say that means sun, but Akhenaten, he's the ruler for this body, this thing, the Aten, and then his son, was Tutenaten or something like that, but then his dad had been deposed and killed or whatever. The city had been raised probably by the same cataclysmic shit.
Yeah,
that was happening
3 years later.
Right, so the same comet,
years later.
the same comet that was causing him to change all the religions, then wipes his fucking city out, like raises it flat, right? And the modern Egyptology says that it was the priesthood that did this. Like there was a
revolt,
revolt or whatever, and they came and just like flattened this. I'm like, no, dude, like. I think that was another destruction, right? It completely flattened the city, and so everyone was like, "Okay, that was wrong. That was not."
But I wonder if that was a jubilee, like that.
Could be, yeah.
Right, 52 years after he begins his reign, it's like his whole city gets raised.
That's right, and they tried to erase him from history because of this. Like,
so if it was part of their belief system that the gods had destroyed the previous pharaoh, and then he tries to change it all, and then it comes
gets
back
destroyed.
Yeah, they're going to be like, oh, okay, that was
that one right. And then the old priesthood comes back in and says, we're going back to Ra, right, to Amen, right, to the hidden god. That's why, and so his son changes his name to Tutankhamen and becomes King Tut.
King Tut.
Yeah, and he's also a long head. You look at his profile, dude, like of his mummy, and that dude has a weird head. Like he's got a long, this weird, strange jaw, and he died young. He was basically just barely above a teenager. He was in his 20s or something.
So it would just be strange, though, if that whole situation was going down during that time, in the time of Moses and all that. And then you have this ancient Sumerian stuff, which is supposed to be way earlier, and they have depictions of
I think
all the stars in the sky. That's what I'm saying. Like, something's wrong here.
I think that this stuff we're talking about right now, all these events, are probably much older than because like Velikovsky tried to put all this stuff in a much more recent, like Larry Scranton talks about this. He's like, this probably is stuff that happened 10,000 years ago, not 3 or 4, or whatever.
Yeah, this is into the last ice age.
Yeah. Maybe part of that, or maybe the one, because there was another cataclysm that was like in 8,000.
Yeah, that's another thing. One of the big problems I have with this idea of the poles flipping is that, like, how is the Great Pyramid perfectly lined up? Like that's just too coincidental.
Right.
Like I believe that the Great Pyramid and that all that stuff was built after, in the same, in other words, sun, quote unquote,
that we're in
right
the very
now.
beginning of it. Yeah,
exactly.
The beginning of the fifth.
I think all of that stuff is a legacy from what was before. What was before was lost, which is what spurred the building of all of this astronomically aligned stuff to figure it all out.
But Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, right down at those places on Titicaca in Peru, like the first guy who really, he stayed there 15 years studying that place. He was like the first guy who really went all through. He says that place is between 45. It's like something between 25 and 45,000 years old, and he bases that on the fact that it's like way off.
Oh, okay.
Right, and he was thinking of the Milankovitch cycles, the fact that the tilt of the Earth nods. But see, what if it they think that because everything's uniformitarian, right? But if there's no nod, but it was just like there was some point way back in history where it got changed.
Right.
So there is a drift or whatever, but the drift may be very slight.
Okay, that was another one of the texts, one of the ancient texts. I can't remember what it was. Forgive me. They were talking about how it's like summer's supposed to be coming and it's winter.
Yeah.
Right? The winter came when the summer was supposed to come, and it's like the seasons all just got mixed up.
Yeah, and then like Narnia, you just have never-ending winter because it keeps flipping over.
So it's I don't know. It's just crazy to think of
if we got flipped over and we were suddenly in the southern hemisphere, we were suddenly in the southern
Winter's
hemisphere.
going to come when it was supposed to be summer.
That's right.
And the sun's going to be rising in the east or rising in the west or east.
Yeah, and that makes sense too because you have the stories about the seas receding. Okay, and I can't remember who was doing this, but they were looking at the physics of this. So you have the Earth as a spinning ball, and we've got these enormous oceans on it that are basically, there's a lot of them that are at the equatorial parts. Okay, so that has a lot of, all that water is moving very quickly. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you suddenly flip this over, and maybe there's some not anomalous, but there's some fundamental physics that says that this can happen without some great expenditure of energy, right? That it will happen automatically somehow, that the flip will just occur given certain stimuli or whatever. All the water is going to recede to the poles while this flip happens, right? It's very strange. Like as the vector of force, which according to angular momentum is going up, right? As it rotates over, all the water pulls away to the poles and stacks up. I mean, it piles up.
And then it all comes back.
And then, like, once the flip is done, it's like
global flood, yeah.
And then it
causing the glaciers to...
Right. And it not only that, but it counters itself at the equator and just, there's this humongous, like, ring wave that and then goes back and forth, bounces all over the planet and just erases it. It just erases the surface, right? So any pyramids that were around before that are gone, like, or they're buried or whatever. So, and that, that kind of makes sense when you see these, like the dinosaur fields in Wyoming with the shale.
But that's okay. So then going back to the lunar eclipses,
right?
So the jubilees, the fact that there's sort of this reoccurring thing happening every so often for a little while, and until it finally settles down, and then every now and again we have an impact, and every now and again, some volcanoes erupt, and just minor compared to that type of cataclysm. There could have been other stuff going on, like in other words, a long period after, we could have had a close encounter that then changed the moon situation to where the eclipse is all.
Oh, okay.
So like let's just go ahead and say, like, based on geologic evidence and all this whatever idea of 12,000 years ago into the last ice age cataclysm, that is when Venus showed up, and so the ideas of previous to these times that Venus wasn't there is somehow before that.
Yeah.
I like, that still doesn't make sense. That okay, well, maybe it does. Then you go way forward to the guy that you were talking about, like the father of astronomy guy, or whatever.
Copernicus. Yeah, Venus is still normalizing.
Yeah, and something takes place that changes the lunar, the situation with the moon, so that the eclipses are all different.
Oh, okay.
Because that's way later, right? But like, they've got all this stuff, like all the eclipses are right, and then suddenly,
like somewhere around 3000 BC, they say this is when all the eclipses stop matching up, when they go back before that.
Okay, but an actual pole reversal to me seems highly improbable to have happened around that period.
Yeah, I agree.
So it had to have been some.
We may have encountered the Tauran, right? Because there's this idea of the Taurus. The comet Enki,
like the Taurid stream.
Right, now it's Taurus, right? Again, back with the bull, right? So the Taurids are supposedly what we encountered 12,000 years ago, okay? But if it was Venus that caused the Taurids, right?
And then, like, there's these huge, like, comet Enkis out there, just a big chunk of it,
right?
Still left,
yeah, giant diamond out there.
So we ran into that at some point, and that fucked up some shit with the moon, but it wasn't enough energy, or it didn't happen in a way that disturbed our position exactly.
Right. Like, so we can, like, I would say this, like, you could, if the complete pole reversal, like a total turnover of the Earth happens, that if it really is based on some kind of strange physics, there shouldn't be any. I mean, there will be a little bit of loss or whatever, but the vector should be almost exactly reversed. So we shouldn't have more days, right? Everything's just turned over. But something else happens that, like, actually is disruptive, something impacting, or a bombardment, or just a pulling, like if long pulling, like Mars coming close and whatever.
Yeah, disturbing our orbit around the sun.
Yeah. So what would have to happen? Like, if you go from 360 days to 365, you have
slow us down.
But you're adding days, so is it speeding you up? Because now you have 5 more rotations per orbit.
Oh, you're talking about the rotation.
Right. So either the orbit gets farther out, so we get 5 more rotations.
I see what you're saying.
Or does the rotation speed up so that there's 5 more rotations and the orbit doesn't move? You know what I'm saying? Like, something in there, something between those two, or one or the other happened.
Combination of it, yeah.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Like, we either went farther out, and that kind of makes sense because it's kind of after this period that we go into this weird ice age. Like, there's the little ice age, and everything gets cold, and it sucks, right? And that may be because the Earth shifted out from the sun enough to add 5 days to the year, right? I don't know. There's all kinds of possibilities.
What a crazy puzzle. We got to take another break.
You need an orrery. Get an orrery and start throwing shit at it. So we're going to take a break, and we will come back for the second half of the number 49, part 2, snakes. And laughing at all audience expectations every day. Brothers of the Serpent podcast. So we have the show observer on with us, Brett England. He's found some interesting stuff about the very ancient Egyptian goddess Net and Ra, and how this connects possibly with the whole Earth changes and everything.
Yeah, this is actually the Egyptian creation myth is what they call it now. This story that. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So Ra, the sun god, who they say is the second to rule the world, by the way, according to their reign of the gods. So Ra had this fear of losing his throne. I guess, it comes from being the second guy to take it. So he discovers that Nut is supposed to have kids. And he's like, no, that's not cool. So at that point, the year is 360 days, and Ra decrees that she cannot give birth on any day of the year.
This is one of those fairy tale, I got this genius thing. You can have kids all you want, except that you can't do it on any normal day of the year.
Yeah, not on a day that ends in Y.
Right. Great. That's right.
So Nut speaks with Thoth, the god of wisdom, and he hatches this plan. So he begins to gamble with Khonsu, the god of the moon, whose light rivaled that of Ra's. So every time Khonsu loses, he had to give Thoth some of his moonlight. And Khonsu loses so many times that Thoth has enough moonlight that he makes 5 extra days. These days were not part of the year, so Nut could have her kids. She has 5 children, Osiris, Horus, Nephthys,
Isis,
and
Set.
There you go.
Yeah.
And Ra is fucking pissed.
Yeah, it's classic.
So there were 4 planets that were visible in the sky until Venus.
Oh yeah,
and then there were 5.
Whoa.
And Horus is actually the son of Osiris and Isis.
Yeah, who are brother and sister also.
Right, and Set is also Osiris's brother.
Yeah.
So it's like
keep it in the family.
So it's like you got those 4 that were originally there, and then from 2 of those 4, a son is born, Horus, and then he actually goes to war with Set.
Right. Because Set has chopped Osiris up into.
So how does that go back to the Greek myth or whatever with the? Does that line?
I'm gonna leave that up to you guys and check back out.
Well, wait. What was your point about the Pharaoh thing? You had another point.
Yeah. That so the standard model as it stands defines the Pharaoh I guess
the beginning of the Old Kingdom. Yeah.
Right, as the appearance of the beard and the nemes, which is the crown that has the cobra heads,
the Uraeus.
So
yeah.
So the Egyptian pharaohs don't exist, according to them, until they all have this fake beard and the snake heads. And like you were just talking about, you've got these images where there's like this weird tail.
Yeah.
And the beard shows up at the same time, and there's a snake in the sky. And then all of a sudden they all start wearing these snake crowns.
Right. And they're holding the flail and the crook.
Yeah. And so, like this old kingdom where they're like, oh, yeah, there was all this other stuff that happened, but there weren't any pharaohs. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, yeah, here it is. This is our line. It seems like that kind of would project a time period, possibly.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. And so the beginning of the Old Kingdom is like they date it to something like 4,000. But again, this is, conventional dating. It's like all up in the air as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Clearly, these events had some kind of they make sense. And like, okay, so like we were kind of joking half joking on one of the other shows about the crook and the flail being this is a surveyor's instrument and the flags, right? Right. Okay, so like if you think about this, like they had to remeasure the earth after all these cataclysms.
Yeah.
So suddenly you have the gods appointing surveyors to go around and measure everything and figure everything out. So you have the pharaoh, right? He's got his understanding. He's standing beneath the god who's directing him, right? He has understanding. He's got the Uraeus, the serpent, because that symbolizes that he has this wisdom of the gods, the serpent wisdom, and then he's got the beard, symbolizing the comet that caused all this bullshit. So he's got the beard, he's got the serpent wisdom of the gods, he's got his understanding, he's got his surveying instrument and the flag.
Yeah.
Right. That's the beginning of the Old Kingdom. Yeah. So it's very interesting.
That's badass. Yeah.
Velikovsky.
Shit. So okay, going back to the Egyptian creation myth now. Like, okay, this is another thing about the creation myths. Like the Sumerian creation myth seems to be another type of planetary disaster that takes place in the heavens.
Yes.
Which results in the current world.
Right.
You have Nibiru, this planet that's rogue that just rolls in and then crashes, like has a duel or a fight with the water world.
Yeah, and Tiamat, the ancient,
and which ultimately results in the hammered bracelet, which is the
asteroid belt.
The asteroid belt, and then it brings the Earth to its current position, and then the Earth is given the moon, which was supposedly Kingu, which was the biggest moon of the original water world planet or whatever.
This is why
Saturn's thrown in there somewhere. I can't remember what the deal is.
Yeah, Saturn was the Saturn and Jupiter were the highest gods at the time before Nibiru came in, but they were the ones like, yes, we'll give you the tools to go fight her because they were afraid of Tiamat.
Yeah, and so after Nibiru caused all this chaos and changed everything and reordered everything, and then it goes back and sits on its throne, the most high, because it has this highly elliptical orbit.
That's tilted 70 degrees.
It goes way up out there and observes its creation, right?
Right.
So there's that, and then you have the Egyptian creation myth, which seems to connect in the same way. Like you've got this strange situation about giving birth in some way to new, like these new beings, and they show up in the sky, and then a fifth one shows up, and then like you were talking about the one early in the show, the Greek ones. That's what I was trying to see.
Metis.
How do they line up? Like Venus coming out of the eye of Jupiter, and so if it would Jupiter be, Osiris?
Okay,
would whatever.
I don't know. I've always viewed these two events as being different. Like the Nibiru Tiamat battle, I view as being this is primordial, because the Sumerians sort of depict it this way, that this is something that happened before they were existed, right? So this is primordial. Like we're talking about.
But so is the Egyptian creation myth. But my point is that I'm seeing correlations in.
Okay, yeah, but I thought, like people were seeing Venus in the sky, so I'm like, this happened way after the Nibiru, right? You know what I'm saying?
I'm talking about the Egyptian creation myth having
some correlation with the ancient Sumerian one.
No, other way around. I thought when I was originally reading it, like years ago, after learning about the Sumerian one, I was trying to figure out how they correlate, because it seems to sort of be the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? But it actually seems more like it makes sense with this more recent event.
Yes.
That's why I was saying, like the Greek one where this thing comes out of the eye of Jupiter or whatever, the forehead of Zeus.
And creates this comet. Like I'm like, to me, that has to be a more recent event.
So tell it again. Like that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay,
like,
so from the way I know it is like Metis is she would be the mother of Venus. She's pregnant with her, right? Zeus consumes her. Like the Greek gods have this habit of eating their children. They don't want them to be born, right? Because they keep taking over. Like Zeus killed his dad, Kronos, and right. So anyway, he consumes Metis to prevent Pallas Athena or Venus or whatever from being birthed.
So he's like the guy in the Egyptian one that's like trying to prevent
Ra.
He's Ra.
Yeah.
Basically trying to say, no, you can't have children.
That's right. Don't have children.
Okay.
And like you can't have them on any day of the year, right? And so he eats her, right? Which makes sense. Okay. But so the story about Thoth going and getting 5 new days is
using the light of the moon.
Right. This is very strange to me.
But it's like what we were talking about before is like there's some kind of weird dance going on up here with physics, like, and the way
and
whatever these
also,
interactions
I'm like,
are.
why is Thoth on the side of Nut instead of Ra? Right. That's also interesting. Like, or maybe I don't know. Like, maybe there doesn't have to be a reason for him because it's like he is defying Ra by going and getting new days for her to have her children.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. But anyway, the Greek myth doesn't have any of that. Doesn't have stuff about new days. It just says that Venus was like after Zeus consumes Venus's mother or Pallas Athena's mother, she is then birthed from his forehead, right? Mm-hmm. She's birthed whole from his forehead. Like
but the mother never comes back.
No, she's gone. And if you look at the Greek depictions,
That's kind of like the hammered bracelet. Like that would be be sort of like Tiamat.
Right.
The
water
she never
world.
comes back. She turns actually into a shield that protects her child.
That's right. Okay, so the Greek depictions, if I'm remembering this correctly, the Greek depictions of the birth of Venus shows like Venus, she's beautiful, naked, and she's standing in a seashell floating. She comes across the waters, right? She's standing in a gigantic like that shell you got outside. She's an enormous half shell. Right?
Yeah.
She's standing in it. What's he say? Venus and Mars were lovers, and their children were Phobos and Deimos. Oh, great. Yeah, the psychopaths, right? They would be serial killers. Phobos and Deimos. Mars' children were all crazy. And they're potatoes, too, by the way. They're not big enough to be spherical. They're just potatoes. But so, yeah, I know that Phobos and Deimos are the moons of Mars, and there's interesting things about that shit. Like, I can't remember which one it is. It might be Phobos, but it orbits Mars faster than Mars' own rotation.
Yeah.
Which, right? So you imagine the planet is rolling this way, and this moon is like, right? Goes
But you can
faster
see how like this idea of the creative force or the creator god that when they couch these sort of astronomical things or occurrences in terms of like giving life, giving birth to this thing which is a moon or whatever.
Yeah.
There's like the creative force or the creator god like rolls in, and it's the comet or something, and it disturbs everything and it causes all this life to be born, right? So look at all these little things.
Yeah.
So busy now.
But if it is destroyed,
That's what I'm saying, dude.
destruction results in life. That's right. And all the engineers go home and feed their children, have itty bitty children of their own. So they grow up big and strong, have itty bitty children of their own. All contribute to the great circle of life. Zorg.
Yeah, but
Fifth Element's badass.
yeah, it is.
That's right. Yeah. We kind of talked about this with the forces of change, like the creative force and the habit force, right? So like going with Sheldrake's idea of morphic resonance being a force of habit of habitual action, of being stability, of being like no change. But then there's this creative force, and these things are balancing each other back. They're going back and forth. Right. If you have nothing but creation, then there's no stability, and things are changing all the time, and it's total chaos.
Yeah.
If you have nothing but the resonance of habit, then nothing ever changes, and it's stagnant and it sucks. So these things are balanced back, and they kind of move up and down. Past, one's greater than the other, and then the other one goes back up. Right. So you have these periods of stability with a little bit of change, and then you have these periods of great change and a little bit of stability, and they go back and forth. And this is what results in, like, so. There's weird stuff when you look at. I haven't seen this. It may exist in the Egyptian stuff or whatever. I haven't seen it in the Greek stuff, but there's this idea of I call it the Anu and Padme. Like these are the names of the ancient gods that I recall, but they're like, view them as two gigantic circles. Okay. And this is like really primordial, right? There's no universe yet. You have Anu, who is the force of stability. He is like light and just, he's like, he doesn't change. And then Padme is like chaos, just complete, utter chaos, blah, blah, blah. Where they meet, where the two circles intersect, the Vesica Pisces, is where the universe takes place. Because that's the place where you have both change and stability. So only in the intersection of these two forces can anything happen. So it's like at the intersection, but you've got these enormous forces that are outside of this, right? And they have this Vesica Pisces in the middle where that's where the universe takes place, is the intersection of these two forces, right? That's the most primordial. If you look at these like I know this is in Tibetan stuff and more in Asian shit, but there's this. These are the most ancient creative god forces that they have in their pantheon. They start with these two forces, and then that results in all the other gods being birthed in this little Vesica Pisces in the intersection.
The circle of death.
That's right. The circle of death. The chaos insurgency.
Totally got to redo that song.
That's right. The circle of death. Yeah, and I guess the change song would just be like, or not the change, the stability one, right?
Yeah.
That's what all the Tibetans are about, the stability.
Yeah.
And then you got the death metal people out there. Somewhere in the mix of this, you have life, right? Where the death metal crosses the
Yep.
Yeah. I love all this ancient, weird. It's like it's philosophical, but at the same time, it's an attempt to what? Explain. It's an attempt to answer probably one of the very first questions that was ever asked. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is this? Like, you look out and you're like, okay, why should there be anything rather than there just, why is there stuff, right? Why is the universe here? You know, that's like one of the most fundamental metaphysical questions that you can ask. And you like, so all of these stories of these primordial birthings of these ancient gods or these forces, they're really, when you go way back, they cease having much personality and they're just kind of a force, right?
Yeah. This
This like fundamental force of like change or chaos, right? Or chaos and stability. Those are all attempts to answer this question of like, why is there stuff?
Yeah.
Rather than nothing.
I don't know, man. That's probably the first really good question. The first question was probably like, where is my rock? But yeah, eventually, like after
Og has rock.
after a long time, then they ask the first.
Somebody's
real
like,
question.
why is there rock?
Asking the real questions. folks.
Asking the real questions, folks. Yeah. What should I make butt flap out of? Rock not good butt flap. Where is my rock?
Anyway,
This is why meteors were so, and comets and stuff were so important. Like in the Stone Age, when you have fucking giant stones coming out of space, that's got to be serious shit. Like this, like we do everything with rocks, and then this giant rock comes down and destroys everything, right?
Yeah.
That's got to kind of fuck with your head a little bit.
yeah. So you can think of that. There's a god up there that's like mad at you,
Right,
Because
because
like, what do you do?
I take a rock
or
and
he's hungry
Yeah, I sharpen it and then I kill stuff with it, and then
Right.
this giant rock's like,
because I'm hungry.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
God
like,
must be hungry.
So feed him people.
Yeah. Preferably other people's people, but if necessary, we'll feed
And
them
then
our people.
later, some civilizers came along. They were like, no, feed him sheep.
Yeah, you can feed him, not people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, even now, people will burn sage, right? Like the most common ritualistic sort of, in the United States anyway, or in the Western world, like encounter, any people having some weird encounter with what they think is a spiritual stuff, like if there's a ghost in the house, you burn sage. What is that? It's a fucking burnt sacrifice.
Yeah.
You know, I always tell people that. I'm like,
dude,
why
that with the whole comet burning everything and flooding everything, and then you look at all these religious
yeah.
traditions where it's like you either like everybody meets up in a building and you start drowning people to
Right.
or and it's like you're born again. It's a whole new world, right?
Yeah. A whole
Yeah.
new world.
Yeah. Or back long ago, it's like put an animal on there and burn it to a crisp because
Right.
that's pretty much what the gods want,
Yeah, that's right.
right? They.
Yeah, and there's that weird the weird story. I can't if it's Elijah, one of those guys or whatever. He's like he has this competition where he's like my
Yeah.
God's better than your God. thing
Yeah,
with
so he builds the altar,
the
and he
prophets
puts
of
it up
Baal.
there,
Yeah,
and he's just
he's all sarcastic about it. He's pouring water over it. He's like, watch this. He like gets all this water pouring all over it and shit, and
Yeah.
still it starts it on fire.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, all that
lightning
water.
bolt.
Yeah, and then the
Starts on
prophets of Baal like dance around theirs for like all day, and they can't do anything, and it doesn't catch on fire, and they all get slaughtered. But yeah, it's like that's really strange.
It's
shit.
almost like sort of a message of like it doesn't matter what you do, you're gonna die. Like,
That's right.
you know, you can pour water on it, you can do all this stuff, but something from space is still going to kill you.
That's right.
So you better get off this planet. And that's what he does later. He's like, "Don't follow me, bro."
Yeah, that's right.
He runs out in the desert.
Yeah.
And just goes into space.
Yeah, and the guy who didn't follow him was like, "Man, I'm glad I didn't follow him. That chariot was made of fire. You guys, that chopper was made of fire." Yeah. So again, going back to Velikovsky and these ideas, like I don't understand why there's still this stigma, right? Okay, Sagan hated Velikovsky, right?
Yeah.
Just like, well, a lot of people did. I guess a lot of
He's a standard modeler.
yeah, well, the just conventional scientists just were not happy with the guy, and it's because he came out of nowhere and was way smarter than them and wrote this badass book that became a bestseller, right? And it's okay. So it's the typical. We've seen this kind of reaction before with Sitchin's books. It was the same deal where they're like, they want to ban the books because the masses are too stupid to understand that they're wrong, right? Basically,
Right.
is what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
If we let the public, like, if they really like this idea, because it's, you know, it's like appealing to the simple mind or whatever the fuck that they say about Sitchin and Velikovsky and shit, that, like, so we therefore need to ban the books. And,
But they think the same thing about the ancient texts. Like then there's the religious groups that are like, our ancient texts are the only ones that are right.
yeah,
And
we are the true church.
and then you have the scientific community or whatever, you know, that are like, they're all fictional.
Right. Our texts are the only things that are right.
Right.
And then they don't want to change the text.
We just wrote the Bible.
That's right.
And your Bible is
It's
a
called
fake
the
story.
Manual for How the Universe Works, Final Edition.
But that's why I keep like just looking at all those, like trying to just look at the whole situation with writing texts. Just logically, it's like, okay, surely after a cataclysm, whatever books we have left over, even if it was fiction, like some of the fiction you were showing me, like Isaac Asimov
Yeah, yeah.
and some of the Heinlein stuff, like if we had those, they were still, it would be like, protected, these are precious, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is a work of art. It's
Right.
So yes, we would strive to protect fictional books, but what would be most important at the time is any textbook,
Right.
anything we had on science, so that we don't. It's like I don't know how to, you know, do all kinds of medical stuff. So if we had a medical textbook, and all
exactly.
that would be sacred.
Or just, we have Brett. That
Right. Yeah. Like, Brett, I hope you still have some medical textbooks. Because
Right.
when you're busy over there, I'm going to need one.
That's right. After the cataclysm, you either need to be here or give me
So
the books.
I'm just trying to look at the whole thing. Like, yes, there are going to be some fiction
Okay, well, so
in the ancient texts. What I'm saying. In the ancient texts, there's going to be some fiction. But I would say that predominantly there's going to be nonfiction. It's going to it's going to be mostly stuff that people needed to know.
right. My idea on this is like that I view fiction. Okay, I should say it this way. I view textual, like written fiction, as a modern phenomenon because it's something for people who could read, and almost no one could read up until very recently, right? The vast majority of people have been illiterate, and so fiction was done around the campfire, right? It wasn't written down.
Yeah.
No one could read it. Like we have modern fiction that is like widely disseminated in text form because we have a vast literate populace that can read. But these sort of stories that would have been told around the campfire, they weren't written down. The stuff that was written down for the ages was what they thought was true stuff. So you're probably right that there's fiction in there, but I don't think that it was ever intentional because what the people who were writing then were trying to preserve was what they saw as the
knowledge.
truth, as
Yes.
what happened or whatever. Yeah,
That's what I'm trying to say.
Fiction is very recent in terms of being written down.
I agree with that. I'm thinking that okay, going back to sort of Graham Hancock's thing of a lost civilization,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And the legacy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a
okay,
we have
I see.
a
Just suggesting
we
there may
have
have been-
we have a civilization that has a high technology. They you know, whatever that means,
Right.
they could circumnavigate the globe.
Yeah.
They had astronomy figured out, that all this shit, right? They could build amazing stuff.
Yeah.
It all gets destroyed, and they start on this, like many different factions start trying to preserve what they knew.
Yeah.
So you end up with these structures like the pyramid
Right.
that have all this mathematics in it. Surely, well, what I'm saying is probably the civilization from before had fiction.
Because they had vast literacy.
Right.
Okay.
So, but so much of that is lost. So then you end up with these factions that still have some of the original documents of the thing. And then you have other ones that are like, we need to write down what we know.
Yeah.
Right. So they write down what they know. They're not writing fiction at that point.
Yeah.
But what some of the original documents
Maybe
that they
fictional.
they're trying to preserve, some of them could have been fictional. Some of them could have been works of art that were great.
That's true.
So we might, by chance, still have some of those that have been translated.
I definitely think that like the Vedic, we know a long oral tradition that probably goes back pre-Ice Age. I mean, it's much older. Like I view it as being probably like Gun and Padding type age, 30,000 years old. Okay, like this is an oral tradition though.
Yeah,
it's very recently, relatively recently, been written down by people because it was getting lost. Okay, and like that's because of their view of the yugas, right? We came down out of the golden and into the to the silver and then into the bronze, and like by the time we're getting into the beginnings of the Iron Age, people aren't smart enough to remember it anymore, and so there's the great sages start to write it down to preserve it because the tradition of memorizing the equivalent of like the entire Old Testament, right? Memorize the whole fucking thing perfectly so that you could stand up and recite it word for fucking word. That is gone. And remember the old story? I was reading this to you, like we were coming back from some job or whatever, and I'm reading to you about Thoth coming out. He's all excited. He's invented writing. Right?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, dude, this is badass. And Ra's like,
sure if he's done a good thing.
Ra's like, no, that's not a good thing because now people won't try to remember shit. They'll just have it in writing, and it's easy to lie. Number one, it's easy to lie in writing, whereas somebody face to face is a lot harder to do. Like if they're lying, you're like, you're probably lying to me right now. But if somebody's doing it in text, it's hard to fucking figure that out.
Right.
And the other problem
maybe what he was actually saying is that because fiction is sort of a lie. So maybe what he said, people won't be able to discern the difference between
fiction,
the truth and fiction.
And the other thing he says is that when the words are coming from a person, you can be discriminate about who you're giving them to, whereas a text is anyone can access it, right? So then you have all these efforts to like hide the text, right? Got the giant vaults and we have locks and all this bullshit, and you put the text in there, or you burn them or whatever, because so there's this weird phenomenon of like getting rid of words because they've been written down because people don't want people to have words, right? The certain kind of words. So the idea of the wizard's grimoire with the big lock on the side of the book, right?
Yeah,
you got to unlock it, right, to get to the knowledge on the inside. And you have to find the key, and there's a giant quest and huge monsters, and
right. I guess to get to my point was just that trying to look at this situation logically when it comes to all these ancient texts and all of these ancient traditions that have been passed down, it seems to me most probable that the vast majority of them are the truth to the best of the knowledge of the people who wrote it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There might be some fiction in there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because we don't know what the civilization that could have possibly been before all of this cataclysmic destruction could have had some fiction that, like I was kind of giving a modern example, like if we had a cataclysm and there was some fiction, whatever we had, we'd probably save it. Right. You try to preserve it, even if it was,
Isn't the thing with George Washington and the cherry tree, that's fictional, right? But this is like a widely known, disseminated story about this person, right? You know what I'm talking about? The whole thing, like I cannot tell a lie, chop the fucking tree down or some shit.
I'm not.
But that never happened, right? But it's built into the mythos, and people tell it like it's a true story, right? So that's kind of like what you're talking about. This is fictional, and yet is kind of been passed on as being true. Like people won't flip out if you're like, no, that never actually happened. It's just some kind of. It's not really clear where it came from, but it's not a true story, right? And I think that's probably what you're talking about. That like people who were writing these texts were writing down what they knew as the past, or what they knew as what happened, and maybe some fiction got in there, but they probably didn't mean to do it, right? Yeah, some of them might have. They're like, well,
or if you intentionally like preserve some of your fictional books just because they were like they're great works of art, right? Like some of the Heinlein books that talk about space, there's so much truth in it. Yeah. Because he was a scientist, he was very scientifically minded, and he kept up with all the... Yeah. So a lot of the physics is correct, and all of this stuff is
absolutely.
Actually, but it's a fictional story.
Right.
But it has all this knowledge in it.
Right.
So you would preserve that. You would want to preserve it.
Yeah.
Because it contains, like, he describes the whole solar system as they fly around in their spaceship and do all this kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
it is actually something that we did have the technology to do
Yeah.
in a way, right?
Right.
So you preserve that, and then it gets copied and copied and copied and
Yeah.
held in temples and all this kind of stuff. And eventually people are looking at it and somebody's saying, that's myth.
Right.
But even if it is fiction, in it are all of these truths.
Right. There are, like, you can have a love story and you look at it, this is like, you can be like, this is so, like, it's just like, it pierces to the heart of the entire subject. You're like, this is so fucking accurate, right?
Yeah.
But on the face of it, like, the person, the boy and the girl are not real. They never existed. Their names are, and yet the story is nothing but truth about this particular thing, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I think that's definitely,
so the whole way that the sort of the, I don't know how to label these people, the not really scientific community, but just the sort of general idea about ancient texts being myth.
Yeah.
Like, they just treat it as though it's all just, that was just fake stories that just, like, people just made them up.
Yeah. Well, it's weird. That started with, it was called German high criticism, right? There's this weird fad that happened in the Victorian, I guess you call the late Renaissance, whatever. Yeah, we need to take a break. But there was this weird fad that went through academe, okay, all the Ivy Leagues, this fad of, like, taking ancient texts and running them through the skirp mill and just, like, ridiculing them and proving them wrong on every point, right? People would... Because it was easy because there was no one there to defend it. The guy who wrote it was dead for thousands of years. So you grab this ancient text, like, they did this with the Iliad and the Odyssey, which up until that point were considered to be relatively true stories, that this war had actually happened and all this stuff. And then these academics grabbed these stories and, like, were like, this is bullshit and bullshit and bullshit, and they went through and quote unquote proved that it was all crap.
Yeah.
And then that was so successful and so. People like it was so successful for the people that did it that they did it to every fucking ancient text that they could find, right?
Yeah.
And after that is when they ceased to be considered by any kind of academics or whatever or scholars to be anything approaching true because they had all been disproven,
Right.
And what has had to happen is people have actually had to go out into the field,
like Velikovsky,
right? And well, the guy that went and actually fucking found Troy.
Right, yeah.
Based on the text, he was like, well, I think this is a true story. And they were all like, you're a fucking retard. And then he went out there and found it. Right?
Yeah.
So Velikovsky's done the same thing. He has treated all these texts that have been, for the past 200 or 300 years, treated by scholars and all of academics as being the wild ramblings of fucking tribal dipshits, right? Where
religious zealots and
right.
whatever.
They've treated them like that. There are these mavericks that say, no, these are... Like, our ancestors were just like us,
Right.
prone to superstition or whatever. But in general, especially when they're taking the time to write a book in a time period when books do not exist, you got to go make the paper. You got to fucking get your ink and you got to do all this bullshit. And then you got to sit down and not die while you're trying to write it, and somebody's got to feed you. Yeah. This is a big deal. And, and you're doing the whole thing by hand and you make this 500-page tome.
And then you put people to work copying it.
Right. That's a serious endeavor.
And then they have to load it onto the freaking camel's back
right.
and haul
no
it
one was like
all the way across the desert to the next temple where they're going to hide that copy. And then they copy that one and then all over the world.
Generally, like, charlatans and hoaxers are not going to go to that much effort.
Right. So, hey, bro, I just finished this book. Now, you need to protect this with your life and get on that camel and ride 500 miles to the west. There is a cave.
Which no man
now,
has ever entered.
You need to go into that cave. And I don't know what lives in there right now, but go all the way to the back.
That's right.
And
kill anything in your way.
A hole. Right. And then when you put this thing in there, you have to put it in there just like this. And then you need to build a wall.
Right. That's right.
Because this is a fictional book that I just made
That's right. This is a giant hoax. I'm like playing this enormous fucking joke.
And the guy's like, sure, man, I'll do that.
Yeah, I'll do that.
And like 3 or 4 of them die on the way there. And
right.
it's just like, come on, dude.
I'm like, what are we doing again? We're taking this book to a cave in the...
in the desert.
Yeah, it's above the Dead Sea.
All right, we got to take a break.
It's going to be a great joke, guys. It's going to be awesome. But we're all going to be... It's going to be awesome, though.
What's the book about?
Never underestimate the links that a Spaniard will go to play a joke, right?
Snakes.
It's about snakes.
espoused by the hosts on this program are deeply rooted in a relentless and unstoppable pursuit of pyramids and ancient texts. Snake Bros, Brothers of the Serpent.
Relentless
Back at it.
pursuit of pyramids.
Right.
Fuck yeah.
That's what it's all about, folks.
Right.
So, final segment already, man. It's the fastest 2 hours in media,
Yeah,
folks.
it's still actually...
Fastest 2 hours in podcasting.
That's right. The planet has not yet rolled into the darkness outside.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So, real briefly, Russ has got some stuff to talk about, but I wanted to bring up the Zendavesta, the Zoroastrianism, the
The
Zoroastrianism.
last remaining text of Zoroaster.
So Brett had done a report on that, and that inspired me to go download the ancient text and
What? Ancient text I don't know about.
ancient text I never know. Push play on phone and listen to it, and it's really hard to listen to because it's so ridiculously repetitive. But the basic gist that I got from it was that this is an ancient remnant of a medical textbook.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
This is what I'm just like, the fact that there is a religion built around this. So the context that I was kind of looking at it in, because Russ had shown pictures of the caves and like this amazing way that they went in down underground and they survived down there.
Yeah.
And then they come out or whatever they were doing. It's like they had to survive through some type of cataclysm. So
Right.
I'm listening to Velikovsky now, and he's brought up the Zendavesta and pointed to like these little verses in the Zendavesta that line up with these other verses about crazy shit going on in the sky and destroying everything. And I'll have to go back, like I said, and make notes on what those specifically were. But I haven't gotten to those parts in the Zendavesta yet. But even still, like listening to it, it sounded to me like a medical textbook because it's
the remnants of what?
the remnants of one that have been totally quant suffed.
Yeah.
Okay. Like it's basically telling. It's almost like it's whoever wrote it originally knew about microbiology, and they're trying to teach these people how to live in a confined space.
Yeah, for a
with
long
a
period of
very
time.
limited population and how to survive. And it's very concerned with this idea of death, that the death is almost like it's almost like a pathogen that can be transmitted, right? So it's like, initially they're saying when something dies, like Brett was pointing out that you can't bury a body, you can't do all this kind of stuff. You have to put it in a place where it can dry out and be far away from everybody. And it actually goes into like it's like, don't allow a dead body to be near water.
Right.
Do not allow a dead body to be burned, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so from these ideas, and Russ was talking about how like, well, if there's a sick person and you burn that flesh, that some of those pathogens can actually
become airborne.
And be passed on. So
In the smoke. Yeah.
it's like they're very, very meticulously concerned with dead bodies and where they must be and how far away from everything they have to be that's important to people surviving.
Right. And who can get close to them? It's like there's the faithful and then
Right. And so it's like, how far from the faithful? And I have to use my computer voice. How far from the faithful?
Yeah.
And then the guy answers,
Right.
The way Ahura Mazda answers, and it's like Ahura Mazda is this freaking textbook, dude.
Yeah. The way you were telling it to me, because I haven't read it at all, but the way he was telling it to me, it sounded like a dialogue between people who didn't know what was going on but knew that somebody else did, and so they're asking them, so what should we do with this? And the guy's like, you got to do this, and they're like, okay, so we can't touch it. He's like, do not ever touch it. Like, well, okay, where do we put it? You don't put it near water. Okay, well, how close to water can it be? Because we're in a confined space.
Right. So they need to know all these details because they do not understand the fundamental.
Right. They don't understand. Yeah.
They don't. The
And
people.
Mazda isn't bothered. He's not even trying to teach them. Yeah. He's like, here are the rules.
So here's the general rules, and then like there has to be people who touch the dead body.
Yeah.
And those people have to strip off all their clothes. Why? Because clothes are really important because we don't have a lot of them and we have to preserve them. So you put all of your clothes over here and you cannot waste any clothes.
Right.
And that's even a quote unquote sin, right? They don't call it a sin, but there's also sort of how it's translated.
Fabrics can like very easily carry pathogens.
So you have to strip naked.
Yeah.
Then you have to go and grab the body. A group of people or whatever, a couple of people go get the body, and they have to be like the most able-bodied, the healthiest. They get the body and they move it to the place where it can dry out. Then they have to be washed in cow piss.
Right.
Which
they have to be lashed.
they have a name. They have a specific name for that.
Yeah.
For the cow piss or whatever. I can't remember what it is, but it's like, okay, there's ammonia in the cow urine,
Yeah.
and so it can kind of like clean them, and then they have to be washed in water, and it's like the reason why I say it's quant stuffed is because they started. It's like they look at it like, okay, he's got to be washed like. If he touches the body in this way, he must be washed 4 times with cow piss and 5 times with water.
Yeah.
Or it's like
ritualistic instead of understanding.
right. It's totally been quant stuffed. So that was my take on it. And so far into the like I said, I had to take a break from listening to it because they couldn't teach them about the microbiology and how these things are transmitted and everything. They had to have answers for every possible situation with a dead body.
Yeah.
So for like 2 hours during the workday, I'm just hearing over and over questions about, well, what should we do with the body if this happens? Well, then you must take the body and do this, and then blah, blah, blah. Well, what happened to those people who had to deal with the body? Then they have to be like this. Okay, cool. So what if there was a dead body like this? And it's just like on and on and on.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Anyway, that was my take on it. And then to tie it into what we're talking about now, Velikovsky. There was one other part real quick about digging holes in rock. And they're saying,
that's right.
They're saying how should we dig these holes in the rock? And the guy, well, you have to use this thing to turn the rock into like clay, and then you mold the clay like a potter's wheel and blah, blah, blah.
What?
And you make all the rooms just so and whatever. And like, if you looked at the show notes in the episode, we talked about this, like the caves that they built are insane. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's like this book is describing the use of a tool that is able to mold the rock like a potter molds clay.
Yeah.
And so now I'm listening to this Velikovsky thing, and he's bringing up like these points about what is written in the Zendavesta about these cataclysms and about the day night and I don't know. I'm gonna have to go back and find out those, and also finish listening to the Zendavesta. But it's like they have some
They had a tool that was
serious knowledge that was preserved in some way, but then they've lost it, and now they're ritualizing everything about it.
And the tool for rock was being loaned to them possibly by the Ahura Mazda people, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, he's like, well, you just take that tool that turns rock into clay.
Yeah, go ahead, Brad. You've been on this.
Yeah, let's hear what you got about the Zendavesta. Oh, it's 2 words. I didn't know.
Zendavesta.
Zendavesta.
It's not Zen. It's Zend.
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 You there, bro? Are you even there, bro?
I'm not hearing you.
He's not. Let me know and to come in for a bit. Okay. So I've been, because of all this stuff we're going through with the comet and like the possibility that it's dropping like food and possibly manna or whatever running through the dust clouds, and then there's the plagues of Egypt, and there's like the rivers of blood, right? I started thinking about, oh, there he is. Is he there? Yeah, he's typing. I can typing. I should pick up my mic is on.
Nope, not here.
Yeah, we don't hear you, bro.
Technical difficulties.
So
you lost your moment.
Moment passed. So I've been thinking about the medieval plagues, right? These are, so we don't know what any of them were. We have the names for the Black Death, right?
Yeah.
The Justinian plague. But we don't actually know what they were.
Right.
Because they came, they wiped out shitloads of people, and they just disappeared. They vanished. No one knows what right? But when you actually dig into the texts of the time, oh, did I hear him? Was that him? You there? No. It's all right. When you dig into the text of the time, the people who were chronicling what was happening, there's all this weird... there he is.
Shit. Okay.
All right. Now you're there.
All right.
Go ahead.
Well, that was an adventure. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, cool. So it's Zend. First off, it's one of the other things that they use to put it in a time frame, because it's not written in ancient Persian like it should be. The Zend language was spoken like as they came in and did the takeover.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you pointed out as this medical textbook, because I haven't even looked at it that way, because it was so mind numbing to read the first time.
Yeah.
And I was so like, what the fuck? Because every time that the question's presented, it's always presented in terms of what thing would make Ahura Mazda most happy.
Yeah.
That was the other thing that
what?
that was the other thing that was different. And I'm not sure if we were reading the same translation, but in the one that I listened to, he was asking what makes the earth most happy. This is what tipped me off right from the beginning, because Ahura Mazda is they're basically like the earth. In other words, like there's this life force and then there's a death force. And so
there's Ahura Mazda, and then there's or whatever his name is, Manu,
right?
Like
and so,
the death force.
Yes. So so everything that the life makes, then there's the opposing death thing, right? And so what the idea of the earth being this place of life and all this kind of stuff, the creation of Ahura Mazda, because he didn't create any death. This other creature comes and creates all the death and all the opposites of everything. So what they're asking Ahura Mazda is what makes the earth most happy. In other words, what makes your creation most happy? In other words, it's almost like, how do we, like, if you were
stay
thinking
alive?
Of it, yes, if you were thinking of it like biologically or in terms of a medical
textbook,
it's like, how do we be the healthiest we can?
Right.
And so he talks about the water, the fire, and the sheep, the food, and then the people that they call the faithful are basically the students, right, of the practice.
Yeah.
And the talk of the stone things that you make, like basically they're like drying boards for corpses. Like you put them out there, birds will come and eat them, dogs will come and eat them. That's totally cool. Just put them way far away from where you live. Don't let them touch the ground. Don't let them touch the water, and just leave them there.
Right.
It'll be fine.
But it's like, okay, so if you're looking at a medical textbook that's trying to teach you how to, say, do some type of like bandaging or bandaging a wound or something like that, it's like you can imagine that the questions that are being asked, it's like, what makes the earth most happy or whatever, would be something like, how do we do this without getting infected?
Right.
How do we
reduce the possibility of contamination?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so it's like they talk about these sort of core things, right, that are the main ways that something can be fucked up or whatever. And so you want to avoid that. That reminded me too about the dogs. The dogs are a big part of it, because a dog is necessary for man's survival, because the dog protects his home and he also protects his animals, right? The sheepdog and stuff. And then there's this other type of dog which has 4 eyes, which I was like, this must have been some type of medical device, but that had been quant suffed, because as soon as something dies, they're like, first you have to look at it with a 4-eyed dog.
Yeah. Like
the 4-eyed dog has to look at it. And if you can't find a 4-eyed dog, then you need to find the red dog with yellow ears or whatever. It's like, okay.
So look for a dog with glasses. and you can't find that.
You know what it?
And all the dog had to do was look at it, and then the death force or whatever would flee to the north.
It's interesting too, because like the ancient, very very ancient, like the Upaut god or deity of Egypt became Anubis.
Yeah.
He is the opener of the way, the shower,
yes,
of, like the leader down the path of death, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And he has the head of a dog.
Yeah,
he is a dog.
He is a dog. Yeah,
Anubis, Upaut.
It's kind of interesting. It almost, to put it in perspective, it would be like, I'm sure you guys have dealt with these at work. I deal with them on occasion now on an ambulance, but when I was in school in labs, you deal with them all the time. Material safety data sheets, the MSDS sheets.
Yeah.
So, they'll say things like, do not put near water. It's corrosive. It's explosive. It's this, and this, and it'll have all these different things you have to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, imagine reading one of those without having any knowledge of chemistry.
Yeah,
That's
do
right.
not use while sleeping. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so like you look at the sheet and you're like, okay, well, what do I do with this? Well, you take the muriatic and you put it over here and it's going to dissolve the limestone away.
Yeah.
Okay. But do not do this,
Do not
or this.
breathe the fumes, right? Yeah.
Right.
So you can't get close to
because
it.
the spirit of the death thing is in the air, and so you can't. How
Right.
far from me does it need to be? And it's
Right.
like, just stay like 3 or 4 paces, away from it.
Yeah.
You're
It's
the
like,
faithful,
so
yeah.
it's exactly like that.
you-
That's actually, that makes that text make way
Yes.
more sense to
That's
me
what I
now.
said. The quant stuff term that we have, the concept that whole idea that envelops that whole idea is so valuable when reading ancient texts.
Yeah, because you begin to you see something that has a scientific base that has been ritualized because and the understanding of it is lost.
Because people trying to preserve it are no longer the people that had the knowledge to begin with. They're just
trying to preserve it.
And as language changes and it's being translated, it's like, and even now, like think about the modern scholars that are translating ancient texts, where they put the word God is because of their own biases, right?
Yep.
Preconception of what God is to these prehistoric people.
Right, because they already think it's a myth in a religion.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's like you can't even trust that word that's in the English translation of the text, because it's like that whoever was translating it obviously already had this modern day idea of religion
and who these people were and what they thought about stuff, and like what a God could just be force.
It's a continuation of quant stuffing. It's still happening.
And it's crazy because that concept, looking at it like a medical textbook, puts into a whole new perspective what Russ was saying about how at the end of Sumer, there's this story of the woman who's praying for, to come back. Well, everybody's dying. There's disease everywhere. All this bad shit's happening. She's like, my son will do everything you say. I swear to God. He comes back and he's like, hey, so I need you to go tell people all this stuff. And he's like, no. And he just keeps walking. And he's like, no, seriously, it's really important. Like, and then what is their and he's like, what's their conversation? It's okay. This is how you're going to get everybody to quit dying. Are you listening?
He's first, like, I need people to kind of stop dying. How do we do that?
And so, like there's this whole manual to how to not get lost and die.
That's right.
That's crazy.
And specific, like almost more specifically, like how to. I mean, think about this. Like in like a butt flap era, you've got 30,000 people living in a confined environment when they cannot go to the surface. It is deadly to go to the surface. So they're closed themselves in. They've got cattle down there. Like think of,
oh my God.
Like think of the, think of like, like the problems we have, like where you've got, what is it called? The brain fever that people get? The deadly
cow fever.
Yeah. Like this fucking
mad cow disease.
Mad cow disease like this. And that it'll incubate for fucking 10 years before showing up, right? You have no idea, and then all of a sudden you're crazy, like.
You guys want to know how to sound really smart? Call it spongiform encephalitis. There you go.
All right, spongiform.
You want to know how to sound really dumb? Call it that cow thing.
The brain fever thingy makes you dumb.
All right. So okay, let's move on back to the plague thing that you were going on.
Yeah, so I'm seeing all this stuff with Velikovsky and this ancient cataclysm and like the Egyptian plagues and shit. I'm thinking of the medieval plagues. Like they also came out of nowhere and they were anomalous. So, and then I remember, William Brambley's book, Gods of Eden, he goes through this really well. Okay, so like I'm just gonna read a couple of excerpts from this part of the book. Okay, so the first outbreak of the plague in Europe followed an unusual series of events. Between 1298 and 1314, 7 large quote-unquote comets were seen over Europe. One was of, quote, awe-inspiring blackness, unquote. 1 year before the first outbreak of the epidemic in Europe, a, quote, column of fire, unquote, was reported was reported over the Pope's palace at Avignon in France. Earlier that year, a ball of fire was observed over Paris. It reportedly remained visible to observers for some time. To the people of Europe, these sightings were considered omens of the plague, which soon followed. It is true that some reported comets were probably just that, comets. Some may also have been small meteors or fireballs. Centuries ago, people were generally far more superstitious than they are today, and so natural meteors and similar prosaic phenomena were often reported as precursors to later disasters, even though there may have been no real-life connection. On the other hand, it is important to note that almost any unusual object in the sky was called a, quote, comet. A good example is found in a best-selling book published in 1557, A Chronicle of Prodigies and Portents, by Conrad Lykothsines. On page 494 of Lykothsines' books, we read a, quote, comet observed in the year of 1479. So this is excerpt out of that book. A comet was seen in Arabia in the manner of a sharply pointed wooden beam, unquote.
Weird.
The accompanying illustration, which was based on eyewitness descriptions, shows what clearly looks like the front half of a rocket ship among some clouds. The object appears to have many portholes. Today we would call the object a UFO, not a comet. This leads us to wonder how many other ancient, quote, comets, unquote, were actually similar ship-like objects. When we are confronted with an odd report of a comet, we therefore do not really know what kind of a thing we are dealing with unless there is a fuller description. A report of a sudden increase in, quote, comets or similar celestial phenomena may in fact be an increase in UFO activity. So this is he's kind of making the connection here, like, so we had these comets in the skies, and then suddenly everyone's getting sick. Right?
Yeah.
This is also where we get the image of death. Okay, so the link between unusual aerial phenomena and the Black Death was established immediately during the first outbreak of the plague in Asia, which is where it kind of first started. As one historian tells us, quote, the first reports of the plague came out of the East. They were confused, exaggerated, frightening, as reports from that quarter of the world so often are. Descriptions of storms and earthquakes, of meteors and comets trailing noxious gases that killed trees and destroyed the fertility of the land. Okay, so it's like we're talking about some kind of biological defoliant, right? The above passage echoes the ancient Mesopotamian tablets, which describe defoliation of the landscape by ancient custodial gods, right?
It was Roundup.
Many human casualties from the Black Death may have been caused by such defoliants. The connection between aerial phenomena and the plague had begun centuries before the Black Death. We saw examples in the Justinian plague. Okay, so let's see. In the year 1117 in January, a comet passed like a fiery army from the north towards the Orient. The moon was overcast blood red in an eclipse. A year later, a light appeared more brilliant than the sun. This was followed by a great cold of famine and plague, of which 1/3 of humanity is said to have perished. Right? This is in 1117, way before the Black Death got started. Okay, let's see.
Real quick.
Yeah.
If the tail of a comet could produce an edible, biological
absolutely.
material like manna,
right?
Then it's easy to.
It could have some crazy, bioform,
crazy.
Some
I mean,
viruses.
like even just like chemicals just coming from that shit. Like
yes,
the
absolutely.
Gases just wipe out everything, and
yeah. But
or if it's solids like
just it could just be poison.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's what's
Seven
interesting
deaths.
is he gets more into the quoting these historians or these people who were chroniclers of the day, right? So here's another one. In the year 1606, a comet was seen after which a general plague traversed the world. In 1582, a comet brought so violent a plague upon Maho in Prague, Thuringia, the Netherlands, and other places that in Thuringia it carried off 37,000 people, and in the Netherlands it carried off 46,415. From Vienna, Austria, we get the following description of an event which happened in 1568. Here we see a connection between an outbreak of plague and an object described in a manner remarkably similar to a modern-day cigar or beam-shaped UFO. Okay, so this is the quote. When in sun and moonlight, a beautiful rainbow and a fiery beam were seen hovering above the church of St. Stephanie, which was followed by a violent epidemic in Austria, Swabia, Augsburg, Württemberg, Nuremberg, and other places, carrying off human beings and cattle. Sightings of unusual aerial phenomena usually occurred from several minutes to a year before an outbreak of plague. So sometimes it was like almost immediate, and then there would sometimes be a year after the sighting, and then, so people are like, well, they're making connections, like this thing was seen a year ago, and they're like, oh, that's why everybody's dying now a year later, right?
Yeah.
But some of them were almost immediate, right?
Well, that would make sense if they saw something in the sky and then immediately people died, and then some other time they see something in the sky and then people die a year later. They're like, it was that thing.
Right. Yeah, especially when they're dying the same way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here we go. This is the part that I got interested in. So sightings of unusual aerial phenomena usually occurred from several months to a year before the outbreak. Where there was a gap between such a sighting of the arrival of where there was a gap between such a sighting and then the arrival of the plague, a second phenomena was sometimes reported: the appearance of frightening human-like figures dressed in black. These figures were often seen on the outskirts of a town or village, and their presence would signal the outbreak of an epidemic almost immediately. A summary written in 1682 tells of one such visit a century earlier. In Brandenburg, in Germany, there appeared in 1559 horrible men, of whom at first 15 and later on 12 were seen. The foremost had beside their posteriors little heads, and other fearful faces and long scythes, which they cut at the oats, so that the swish could be heard at a great distance, but the oats remained standing. When a quantity of people came running out to see them, they went on with their mowing. Okay, so they're out there like walking through the crops, whoosh, swinging these things, whoosh, that's making this swishing noise, but it isn't cutting the crops down. So he says the visit.
Yeah, I remember in Ancient Aliens they had a depiction of these dudes like wearing hazmat suits with like gas. They're
but this is our modern depiction of death.
Right,
the cloaked skeleton, the skeletal tall guy with the scythe, right?
Right.
But he says the visit of the strange men in the oat fields was followed immediately by a severe outbreak of the plague in Brandenburg. This incident raises intriguing questions. Who were these mysterious figures? What were the long scythe-like instruments that they held that emitted a loud swishing sound? It appears that the quote-unquote scythes may have been long instruments designed to spray poison or germ-laden gas. This would mean that the townspeople misinterpreted the movement of the scythes as an attempt to cut oats when in fact the movements were an act of spraying aerosols on the town's food. So they're out there, right? This is a depopulation thing. They're trying to wipe out, and they do. The Black Plague kills like 75% of everybody that lived in Europe, right? Yeah, so here's another one. In the year of Christ, 1571, was seen at Krimitz in the mountain towns of Hungary on Ascension Day in the evening to the great perturbation or disturbance of all. When on the Schulzenberg there appeared so many black riders that the opinion was prevalent that the Turks were making a secret raid, in other words, the Muslims, the Ottomans, but who rapidly disappeared again, and thereon a raging plague broke out in the neighborhood. So they see all these black riders going across the countryside through their fields and shit. And they're like, oh my God, we're about to get destroyed by the Muslims. But they just vanish, and then everybody gets sick and dies. Right? Yeah. Strange men dressed in black, demons, and other terrifying figures were observed in other European communities. The frightening creatures were often observed carrying long brooms or scythes or swords that were used to sweep or knock at the doors of people's homes. The inhabitants of those homes fell ill with the plague afterwards. It is from these reports that people carry the popular image of death as a skeleton or demon carrying a scythe. The scythe came to symbolize the act of death mowing down people like stalks of grain. In looking at this haunting image of death, we may, in fact, be staring into the face of something else. Of all the phenomena connected to the Black Death, by far the most frequently reported were the strange, noxious mists. So this is the idea of miasma, right? It's a strange word, but miasma, like there were these weird, like discolored fogs, like dense fogs that were like low lying, would roll through a town, and then everyone will fucking die.
Yep, sounds like Comet Tail.
Yeah. Vapors were often
the shadow of death.
Yeah, vapors were often observed even when the other phenomena were not. Mr. Knoll points out that moist pestilential fogs were a feature which preceded the epidemic throughout its whole course. A great many physicians at the time took it for granted that the strange mist caused the plague. This connection was established at the very beginning of the Black Death, as Mr. Knoll tells us, quote, "The origin of the plague lay in China. There it is said to have connected to rage already in the year 1333 after a terrible mist emitting a fearful stench and infecting the air. Another account stresses that the plague did not spread from person to person, but was contracted by breathing the deadly stinking air. During the whole of the year 1382, there was no wind, in consequence of which the air grew putrid, so that an epidemic broke out, and the plague did not pass from one man to another, but everyone who was killed by it got it straight from the air. Reports of deadly mists and pestilential fogs came from all plague-infested parts of the world. A Prague chronicle describes the epidemic in China, India, and Persia. Then the Florentine historian Matteo Villani, who took up the work of his brother Giovanni after he died of the plague in Florence, relays the account of earthquakes and pestilential fogs from a traveler in Asia. Right? The same historian continues, a similar incident of earthquake. So there's like earthquakes, right? So I do see the idea of like there's this commentary, right? There's this weird, there's something happening that's astronomical. Earth is like shaking. And then there's these weird fogs that come rolling in, and instead of like being able to pick it up in the morning like manna, you're fucking dying from the plague, right?
800 million viruses land on every square meter of the planet every day.
Whoa. Wow.
So like that's happening all the time, and they're flying in the jet streams and moving all over the place. So like some comet comes by and disrupts some stuff, and you got some earthquakes, and the ground's opening up, and things are spewing out, shit out, and there's gases, or the comet's tail
is full of biological stuff,
and it's just spread all over the world, in a very short time period.
Yeah, I mean, think about that blood rain in India. Like, how did nobody those were blood cells? How did that not start killing people? Like, there's weird biology happening in there. It's very lucky, or maybe they did. I don't know. Let's see. Earth itself was a state of convulsion, shuddering, spitting forth heavy poisonous winds that destroyed animals and plants. This is the other thing that isn't ever really talked about with the plague. It wasn't just people that died. Like all the cattle and animals and stuff would die too. Not just domesticated stuff, but the mice in the walls, the cockroaches, like everything was fucking dying, right? And then the plants were also dying. It was killing the trees. Like their leaves would just come out. People would come out in the morning after having one of those mists go through, and they said that all the leaves of the trees, which were green, had just fallen to the floor. Like all of them just dropped off, right? This is like a badass defoliant fucking shit. Let's see. There's Let's see if I can find there's one more. Let's see. Plague ravaged town of Esben. He talks about how there were towns, especially in Germany and in Austria, there were these isolated towns. They're out there in the mountains. They don't have any, they don't have any contact. It's the middle of winter, right? The town has maybe has a few hundred inhabitants, right? Because of the heavy snows, no one is coming to or going from that town during the winter until the winter passes, right? And yet, once the winter has passed and the first traders make their way there, everyone in the town is dead. Like, they're all fucking dead. And there's no vector. Like, no one could have brought the plague to that town, but the entire town is wiped out.
Yeah.
Right. And there are some horrible stories where they find like a few kids like alive in a basement and everyone in the fucking town is dead. Like,
But it reminds me of that Silent Hill, right?
Yeah.
Like the earth just opens up above a freaking coal beds way down there, and just all this gas just comes out and just wipes out an entire.
That's right. All this carbon monoxide comes out, like, or the lakes where the bubble comes up underneath and just kills everything, plants, animals, everything off all around it. Yeah.
Golly.
Yeah, but
shit.
And it's Black Death though. That they have the ring around the rosy thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They see these. They associate with the Black Death because they see the sores all over the people. Like, they're like, okay, this is the same whatever it is. We don't know. Like, the modern conception of the plague was that it was some sort of biological, probably a bacteria or maybe a virus, but we don't know that. Like,
But if it's killing trees and plants, that's like
kind of does. Yeah, that's why they kind of ignore that shit.
Yeah, we usually don't have the same problems with the same pathogens.
Right. Like, if it's killing everything that's alive, it's probably not bacteria. It's something more fundamental.
Because the bacteria is probably also being killed.
Right. The bacteria also has black spots on it, circles around it. Yeah. I mean, it's. Let's see. So they're trying to figure out defense against it. Germ-saturated aerosols, vaccines to combat the plague had not been invented, and the people's only hope was to burn away the deadly mist with fire. Hippocrates and those who followed his advice may have actually saved some lives. So yeah, he was talking about how Hippocrates was like, just burn everything, like, And that's
not a bad idea,
right? And that's because they weren't thinking that it was, this is not some microbiological thing. It was in the mist. He was like, if we set everything on fire, that mist will be burnt off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. So got to try something. Oh, he's got all these quotes here. But the hand of the Lord was heavy upon the people of Ashdod, which is a Philistine city, and he destroyed them and killed them with emerods, which is painful swellings. Then the hand of God was against the city of Gath, another Philistine city, and very great destruction, and he killed the men of the city, both young and old, and they had emerods in their secret parts, right? Fucking sores everywhere, like all over you. Emerods. That's what they're called, folks. Emerods.
Yeah. Watch out for those.
That's right.
If you get one, don't go to the doctor. Just burn everything.
But what do you think about the idea of like these figures? Like so if it's commentary, and yet there's this, are they taking advantage of this?
Brett had this idea that maybe there were some people in the know that were actually
spreading it,
trying to stop it. Like, they're spraying the crops to like stop this, but it doesn't. I mean, it just doesn't make sense if everything's dying,
right?
But he was kind of saying, like, what if they like some? So you imagine,
why would they be?
Let's say you have a virus is going to be being spread, or something, some deadly disease is about to spread, and you go, these doctors go over to some tribe in the middle of the Amazon. They know they're about to get nailed, and they start giving people shots.
Yeah.
And doing all this stuff to people, but then the people that they gave shots had already contracted, and they start getting sick, and then then forever after that tribe's going to have this tale about these people that came in and spread this plague, and they all died.
That was actually happening with Ebola. Remember that?
It was really the other way around.
Yeah, with the most recent outbreak of Ebola, the medical personnel that were going in, they were getting killed by the natives because they thought that they were actually spreading it with the vaccinations. Yeah,
that was. So yeah, I don't know, man. But also, it's like the imagery with the plagues in Egypt during the Exodus, the angel of death, the whatever it is, the
Passover
shadow of death,
the shadow of death.
It's like they sort of give agency to the sort of the imagery of whatever's happening.
Yes,
if it is a natural phenomenon, this comet or the solids coming down from the tail are just heavy, but they're still sort of gaseous and they're just black.
Right.
You can't even, it's
Doesn't
like, looks like black figures on the mountainside.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a good point. Doesn't Velikovsky also suggest that possibly a lot of the hydrocarbons, that the oils and shit that we've got are from these events? Like this rained onto the surface, right? And this is why we had tar pits. It's like, and this is why so many things are trapped in it because it actually rained onto them.
That was my thought, right? These tar pits were actually raining down.
Yeah,
that's why there's all these freaking skeletons in them. Not because animals are stupid and just walk into tar
pits and die. Yeah, we can play Extinction later.
I don't know. I'm just playing around with all these ideas that he's throwing out there. It's fascinating.
This is also. Are we about out of time here?
Yeah, whenever.
Okay, yeah. That's one other thing he talks about here. This is interesting. The Black Death not only killed a great many people, it also caused deep psychological and social wounds. People in the past were convinced that the epidemics were God's punishment for sin, and this caused deep introversion. It was natural for people to accuse themselves and their neighbors of wickedness and to wonder what they had done to deserve their punishment. It rarely occurred to the victims that the plagues, even if deliberately inflicted, had nothing to do with trying to make human beings more virtuous. After all, the social and psychological effects of the plague produced the opposite result. The misery and despair generated by the massive death tolls brought about widespread ethical decay. In a dying environment, many people will no longer care about whether their actions are right or wrong. They're going to die anyway. In the fearful climate of the medieval plague, spiritual values noticeably declined and mental aberration sharply increased. Yep. The same results are observed during war. Although the Bible and other religious works may preach that plagues and wars are created by God to ultimately make the human race more virtuous and spiritually advanced, the effect is always the opposite. The cataclysmic nature of the Black Death overshadowed another disastrous occurrence of the plague years, a renewed attempt by Christians to exterminate the Jews. False accusations circulated that Jews were causing the plague by poisoning wells. These rumors stirred up a fearsome hatred of Jews inside those Christian communities being devastated by the epidemics. Many Christians participated in genocides, which may have claimed as many lives, if not more, than the slaughter of the Jews by the Nazis in the 20th century. Right? So, like, the idea that this is like God's attempt to make us
purifying
better is bullshit, right? This is William Brambley is brilliant about this. He's saying this is the custodians.
Yeah.
Their aim is to control us through this constant. They're constantly
dividing,
fucking with shit, and making us fight each other so that we're divided.
Tower of Babel.
That's right.
They're all living in harmony, speaking the same language, communicating well with each other. So confuse all their languages so that they don't know who each other are, and then they'll fight each other forever.
That's right.
Yeah, and great idea.
Yeah, and then they have this society. He calls it the Brotherhood, that are always going in, and they're sort of the edge of the blade. They go in and they tweak things and make sure that the fighting happens, or that tensions stay maximized and shit. Yeah. So like he's suggesting that it was Brotherhood agents out there in the fields spraying this shit, Yeah. And it was because where they were having a renaissance, they had come out of the Dark Ages and were starting to, like, maybe things were getting better. Like, Rome had fallen 1,000 years before, and like there was all this horrible shit, and they were starting to come out of it. Nope, like wipe them out.
Yeah.
The Justinian plague destroyed Athens.
Yeah, if you look around, you can definitely find some remnants of that type of behavior in modern times without cataclysms that are natural.
Yeah, that's right.
But I tend to think now more than ever that a lot of these, these ancient stories, like we were just talking about, where they think, oh, God's mad at us, so like, rip out everyone's heart on top of this pyramid.
Yeah,
is more like that superstitious response to a natural phenomenon.
Right. And then there's the survivor's guilt. Like I've always thought about this, about like if you just take the story of Noah and take it for granted that it happened as said, like you and your family are the only ones that survive on the entire planet. And like when the ship goes aground and you come out and you look out on it, like the water's going down, but you just see miles of mud, right? Like there's a known traumatic problem called survivor's guilt, where like, if you're the only person that somehow miraculously survives a plane crash and like 240 people die and you're somehow miraculously alive and unhurt, right? It's survival's guilt. You're like, why, there are all these questions. And like the survivor guilt of being the only surviving human on the planet, or the only surviving family on the planet, must be enormous. Yeah. And of course they're going to say, because this is the only defense you have mentally, they died because they were evil.
Yeah.
It wasn't, like I can't I don't have to feel bad because they deserved it, right? Like this is a defense mechanism, right? God killed them because they were bad, and I wasn't. This is why I survived. This is a you can easily. I'm not saying this is actually what happened, but you can easily see how psychologically somebody would come up with this because they have to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the guilt would kill you, right? You could not live with it. So you have to there has to be some way to defend yourself against that incredible guilt by saying, they deserved the death that they got, and I must be good because I survived, right?
Yeah, otherwise you just drink rum on the beach all day. That's what pirates did, because,
That's right.
Their buddies were dying around them all the time.
That's right. When they're the last survivor of the shipwreck, they're just like slamming the rum. Where's the rum? That's right. All
Sorry
right.
to make a joke about that at the very end of this. But anyway.
Well, Brett's like, man, Jews had it rough. That's his last comment.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's so true.
That's true. But I think we've been wiping each other out,
Yeah.
and it's the fucking longheads, bro. I'm telling you.
Yeah, but also, the cosmos are fairly regularly in cosmic terms, wiping us out.
Yeah. But the Nephas are way out there, like tweaking it. Beep. They're like, if we poke this comet like just a little bit right now, in 10,000 years, it's going to be quite a show.
Okay, that's another, real quick before we end the show, that is another psychological thing that, like, when all this bad stuff happens to you,
you're like, who is doing this?
Yes, somebody is organizing this shit, right?
This is too organized.
This has obviously happened to us as an entire species.
That's right.
Like look at where we're sitting right now in a cube on top of the ancient bones,
billions of bones
of a dry seabed, and there's millions and millions of bones. And it's like, it's not aimed at us, dude, because look at all
it
the
is.
bones.
Yeah, that's right. It kills everything else too.
Exactly.
Like, don't be a selfish asshole. All the trees also died, and all the animals also died.
Right. So
and all the fish.
Like all due respect to William Brambley, but they're not really focused on us. It's like everything. Like everything is being killed over and over and over and over.
Yeah. Because we're here. Because they're trying to kill us. Yes. I mean, like, when I nuke a city, if I nuked a city, I'm not trying to kill the dogs and the cats and the mice, but, collateral damage, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to kill the humans. They were in the way, or they're there. I don't care.
I'm just saying that's another one of those psychological things. Like,
like,
who's doing this to me?
Yeah. God damn it. Well, and Graham Hancock says we're a species with amnesia, but I also say that if we're a species with amnesia because of these cataclysms, then we're also a species that is collectively traumatized, right? There is trauma that takes place from, you get PTSD, or you get where you repress the memories on purpose because you can't handle them, you can't face them, right? And then this causes all kinds of issues. So if we have amnesia because of a cataclysmic traumatic event, culturally or species-wide trauma, then we also have like a collective, like a mental illness.
And we have a collective paranoia, which is like God is coming to destroy us because we're all sinners.
Yes, exactly. There's this weird apocalyptic, we've got the prepper syndrome, right? There's some people that are just like convinced that the end is nigh, right? And it's probably, that's their version of the response, right? This is one facet of the response to the trauma of the fact that it has been nigh quite a few times in the past. They're like, oh, we're all going to die. And maybe they're wrong, but in a way they're right, because we are.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of if, but
it's a matter of when.
That's right. We are all going to die. I'm just going to say that. That's the lesson for this show. Yep. You're all going to fucking die.
So get back to work.
That's right. Just get back to work. Find me more gold.
Put on your snake hats and go back to work with a beard.
Yeah, get that Uranus with the serpent sticking out of your forehead, the flags, and all right, so let's see. I had some other stuff to say about in the show notes. Oh, yeah. Okay, I wanted to tell people that I've set up a thing I want to kind of to get more realistic numbers for what's really how many downloads and all that kind of stuff. So if you start to notice that there's a redirection thing happening when you are downloading the show, that's what that is. Like I have this redirecting thing where when you click to download the show, the first address that you go to is basically just cataloging, okay, somebody's downloading the show, and then it redirects you to the actual download link. So don't get suspicious. I put that in there on purpose, right? It's Blueberry, so they're basically doing tracking for me on that to find out what the numbers are. I'm gonna, you know, all 5 of our listeners. I want to keep track of you guys. So yeah, other than that, you can go, you can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. The website now is just brothersoftheserpent.com. That will take you to the blog where you can see everything, comment there. Thanks to Ty Stone, Kyle Allen, Sonny Allen, Dave Allen, Laura Allen, me, and Brett England for all the work that everybody does on this show. Thank you guys very much. And thank all of you listeners out there. Good night, Adamu. Get back to work because you're all going to fucking die unless you have a hat with a snake.